At 3 o'clock in the morning, my daughter Clara called me. She only managed 5 words. "Dad, please come get me." Then the line went dead. By the time I drove over to her in-law's massive luxury estate in Austin, Texas, her mother-in-law, Eleanor Kensington, was already standing in front of the ornate front gates, with a cold sneer on her face. She told me, "She isn't going anywhere." I didn't argue, and I didn't beg. I just turned around, walked back to my 10-year-old Chevy Silverado, put it in reverse, and slammed on the gas. I backed up, then gunned it straight into that $30,000 custom mahogany gate, flooring it until the whole thing tore right off its hinges. But when I burst inside the house, Clara wasn't there. They told me she had suffered a nervous breakdown and had already been taken away for treatment. In that exact moment, my blood didn't just boil, it turned to pure ice. Right then and there, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to bring my daughter back home. I was going to buy up every single piece of the proud business empire they loved so much, and then I was going to burn it to the ground with my own 2 hands. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and I am 65 years old. To my neighbors, I am just a retired Texas rancher who drives a beat-up pickup truck and spends most of his time mending fences and tending to horses. They see a quiet, weathered old cowboy. What they don't know about are the shell companies under my name, or the massive private equity empire I built up since the 90s, by buying up bankrupt oil fields and distressed assets. They certainly don't know that the cash sitting in my safe could buy their entire upscale neighborhood 3 times over. I always kept a low profile because I wanted Clara to find a man who loved her, for who she was, not for her father's bank account. I thought she had found that kind of love with Julian Kensington. I was dead wrong. When the red numbers on my bedside clock flipped to 3:03 a.m., the sound of the phone ringing was still echoing in my mind. It wasn't just a regular ring, it felt like a piercing alarm. I fumbled for the receiver, my heart already hammering a dangerous rhythm against my ribs. "Dad!" her voice came through, sounding like a ghost of the vibrant girl I had raised. Her words were slurred, thick with absolute terror. "Dad, please come get me. They won't let me leave." Next came a muffled thud, the distinct sound of a phone being violently slapped out of someone's hand. In the background, a man swore in a furious, muffled voice. Then nothing but dead silence. I didn't say hello, and I didn't ask what was wrong. I was already throwing off the covers and pulling my jeans on over my pajamas. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a raw fury I hadn't felt since my days fighting roughnecks on the West Texas oil rigs back in the 80s. I checked the GPS tracker I had installed on Clara's phone years ago. She used to roll her eyes at me and call me paranoid. Right now, that little blue dot, blinking at the Kensington estate, was the only thing keeping me sane. I grabbed my truck keys and hesitated for a fraction of a second as I passed my gun safe. No, not tonight. If I took a weapon, I would use it, and I wouldn't be any help to Clara if I ended up in a jail cell. I needed my hands. My hands would be enough. The drive from my ranch to the wealthy hillside enclave where the Kensingtons lived usually takes 45 minutes. I made it in 20. I pushed that old Chevy pickup to 90 miles an hour down the empty highway, the truck frame shaking violently in the wind while the streetlights stretched into white blurs across my windshield. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather groaned under the pressure. My mind raced back to last Thanksgiving when I noticed a bruise on Clara's collarbone. She told me back then that she had just bumped into a cabinet handle. I chose to believe her because I wanted to respect her marriage, and I wanted to believe that the prominent Kensington family, with all their political and business connections, were decent people. That was my first fatal mistake. I turned off the main road and drove onto the private lane leading into their community. Out here, the driveways were longer than the main street of my hometown. There were manicured hedges, security cameras everywhere, and a heavy, dead silence. This place was a fortress, built specifically to keep people like me out. I slammed on the brakes right in front of the main gates of the Kensington estate. It was a massive structure of stone and mahogany, designed to intimidate anyone who looked at it. My bright headlights flooded the driveway. With the engine still roaring, I jumped out of the cab. "Open the gate!" I roared. My voice echoed through the quiet night air. The intercom buzzed with static, but nobody spoke. Then the front doors of the mansion swung open. Eleanor Kensington stepped out onto the wide veranda. She was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my entire truck. Holding a glass of whiskey, she looked down at me from the top step, like I was a gardener who had knocked over a trash can. "Go home, Arthur," she called out, her voice calm but dripping with condescension. Making a scene like this is incredibly tacky. "I want to see Clara." I marched right up to the gate, grabbing the iron bars. "She called me. Something is wrong." Eleanor took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink and let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Clara's having another one of her episodes. She is hysterical and completely unstable right now. Julian is inside trying to calm her down. We have already arranged for her to be taken to a specialized care facility to get some rest. Open this gate, Eleanor. This is your last chance." She walked slowly down the steps, stopping just on the safe side of the secure gate. She looked me up and down, taking in my scuffed cowboy boots, my old flannel shirt, and my gray hair. She didn't see a threat. She just saw an annoying hillbilly. "You people are always so emotional," she said, swirling her glass. "Listen to me carefully. Clara is very sick. We are handling it. Now get off my property immediately, or I will call the police and tell them a crazy man is trying to trespass. I'm sure the sheriffs will be very interested to know why someone dressed like you is skulking around at this hour." She turned her back on me. She dismissed me. She thought that wooden gate was enough, and she thought her husband's title as a former state senator was enough protection. I didn't yell, and I didn't curse. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over my entire body. I walked back to my truck, climbed into the driver's seat, and buckled my seatbelt. I shifted into reverse and backed up until my rear bumper was practically touching the bushes across the street. Eleanor stopped halfway up the steps. She turned around, knitting her brows together. "What do you think you're doing?" I shifted into drive. I smashed the gas pedal all the way to the floor. The V8 engine let out a roar like a wild beast waking up. The tires shrieked against the asphalt, filling the air with the smell of burning rubber before they violently gripped the pavement. I saw Eleanor's eyes go wide as her drink dropped and shattered on the driveway, but that sound was instantly swallowed by a massive explosion of noise. My truck hit that mahogany gate dead center at 50 miles an hour. The deafening crack of splintering wood ripped through the night sky as the solid stone pillars crumbled and the electronic locks snapped like toothpicks. The gates burst wide open with half of the wooden paneling flying off its hinges and tearing deep gouges into the smooth driveway. Thank God the airbags didn't deploy, but my neck snapped back hard from the impact. I didn't feel any pain. Adrenaline is the best painkiller there is. I drove the truck straight up to the front steps, the tires crushing the broken glass she had dropped moments before. White steam hissed loudly from the radiator. I kicked my door open and stepped down. Eleanor was screaming now, stumbling backward with all of her previous composure completely gone. "You savage! You're going to prison for this!" I walked straight past her. She tried to grab my arm, but I swatted her away like a fly. I kicked the front door open. It wasn't even locked. The inside of the house smelled like sandalwood and the sour stench of old money. A man in a black suit stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. A private bodyguard. He was huge, much younger than me, with the kind of heavy muscle that looked like it was built entirely in a gym. "Sir, you need to stop right there," he ordered, his hand moving toward his belt. I didn't stop. I kept moving forward. He lunged to cut me off, swinging a heavy right hook. I ducked underneath it. I spent 40 years hauling heavy steel pipes on drilling rigs. I don't throw fancy punches. I use leverage. I drove my shoulder straight into his midsection, instantly knocking all the air out of his lungs. As he doubled over in pain, I brought my knee up hard, catching him square on the bridge of his nose. With a loud, wet crunch, he collapsed to the floor and didn't move again. "Clara!" I roared, charging up the grand winding staircase. I threw open the double doors to the master bedroom. Julian was standing by the bed, buttoning up his shirt. He looked up, his face pale and his eyes wide with pure shock. "Where is she?" I growled. "Arthur, calm down," he stammered, holding his hands up in defense. She completely lost it last night, had a total breakdown. We had to call a private medical team to take her in. I'm doing this for her own good." "Liar," I said, shoving him aside as I rushed into the master bathroom. My heart stopped dead in my chest. There was a used syringe sitting right on the counter. This wasn't a nervous breakdown. They had drugged her. I turned around and stared down Julian, who was backed into the bedroom corner, literally shaking. "Where did you send her?" I asked, keeping my voice dead calm. It was the kind of quiet that lets you know you're in real trouble. This is a legal medical intervention, Arthur. She's sick. You can't just... I stepped closer and he flinched hard. "I hasn't even touched you yet," I whispered. "If she suffers any permanent damage because of this, there won't be a corner on this earth where you can hide from me." I walked back down the stairs, stepped right over the still groaning bodyguard, and headed out the front door. Eleanor was standing by my truck on her phone. She looked at me, and there wasn't a single trace of worry for her daughter-in-law on her face. Just absolute offended rage. "The police will be here in 2 minutes, Arthur," she spat. "You destroyed my property. You assaulted my staff. You're never going to see the light of day again." I walked up to the driver's side door, stopped, and just looked at her. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" I said. "You think because you live behind a fancy gate and I drive a pickup, you hold all the cards?" In the distance, I could already hear the sirens wailing, getting louder and louder, cutting through the dead silence of the neighborhood. Red and blue police lights started flashing against the trees at the end of the driveway. I pulled the door open and climbed in. The engine started right up. The radiator was still smoking and the front bumper was smashed into the grill, but the truck could still drive. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Eleanor screamed over the sound of the sirens. I looked at her through the shattered window. "No," I said, completely calm. "You're the one who has no idea whose stuff you just stole." I threw it in reverse and backed out of the wreckage of their perfect life. I knew the cops weren't coming to save me. They were coming to lock me up, and I was ready for it. Because for the first time in 30 years, Arthur Pendleton was about to start a war. When the first cruiser slammed on its brakes and blocked my path at the end of the driveway, I thought to myself, before tonight is over, everyone is going to know the truth. But first, I had to survive the next 10 minutes. Cops poured out of their cars with their guns drawn. They didn't see a father trying to save his daughter. They just saw a dangerous old man causing total chaos on a wealthy estate. "Get out of the vehicle. Let me see your hands." I cut the engine and put my hands out the window. But my eyes never left Eleanor Kensington. She was just standing there with a smug, victorious smile on her face. She thought this was the end of the story. She thought she won. She was wrong. This was just the opening move of a chess game, and I had resources her dried-up brain couldn't even begin to imagine. When the officers grabbed me roughly and slammed me face first onto the hot hood of my truck, I didn't feel any fear. I felt a strange, intense focus. I knew exactly who I needed to call, and I knew exactly which strings I needed to pull. The handcuffs snapped tightly around my wrists, the cold metal digging deep into my skin. "You're under arrest for trespassing, aggravated assault, and felony criminal mischief," an officer barked in my ear. I didn't fight back. I let them pack me into the back seat of the cruiser. Eleanor walked right up to the supervisor, pointing her finger at me and spinning her web of lies as fast as she could. I leaned back against the hard plastic seat and closed my eyes. All right, I thought. You want to play power games? You want to see who knows more people? I took a deep breath. Let's play. The back of that police car smelled like old vomit and cheap disinfectant. My wrists throbbed inside the cold handcuffs, but I sat up straight. I refused to slouch, and I refused to look like the criminal they had already decided I was. The drive to the station was short and dead silent. The cops in the front seat didn't speak to me, didn't ask for my side of the story. To them, the script had been written the second they pulled up to the Kensington estate. You have a wealthy, influential family, a gated community, and a rough old man in a beat-up truck who smashed up their property. It didn't matter if I had paid 10 times more in taxes over the last few decades than the numbers on their badges. In that car, I was just a violent intruder. When we got to the precinct, they dragged me out with way more force than necessary. A young cop with a buzz cut squeezed my arm so hard it was definitely going to leave a bruise. "Keep your head down," he barked, shoving me onto a chair in the booking room. He wasn't just following protocol, he was trying to show me who was boss. I didn't resist, giving them absolutely no excuse to get rough. I gave them my name and my address. When they asked for my occupation, I just said, "Retired." The desk sergeant behind the counter snickered. "Retired from what? Safe cracking?" I looked him dead in the eye. This was a man who probably spent his whole life feeling small, and now that he had a badge and a gun, he felt like a giant. "Retired from building the municipal complex you are currently sitting in," I said evenly. The contractor for this building had been on the verge of bankruptcy, and it was my company's funding that actually got it finished. He stopped typing. He looked up, really looking at me for the very first time. Then he scoffed, turned back to his monitor and said, "Put him in a holding cell." They took my belt and my shoelaces. They stripped away my dignity piece by piece and locked it all in a clear plastic bag. Then they shoved me into a cell that smelled like stale urine and pure desperation. The heavy iron door slammed shut, the echo vibrating right in my empty stomach. I sat down on the cold concrete bench. The cell was empty except for a drunk who was totally passed out in the corner. I leaned my head back against the cinder block wall and closed my eyes. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. My mind drifted back to 3 years ago, the day Clara told me she was marrying Julian. We were sitting on the back porch of the ranch, drinking sweet tea. She was absolutely glowing. "Dad, he's different," she told me. "He comes from a good family. They're people with real influence." I tried to warn her. I told her that people with that kind of influence usually think the rules don't apply to them. I told her money doesn't make a man good. It just makes him bolder in his worst habits. But she was head over heels. She saw a prince. All I saw was a man whose eyes drifted somewhere else whenever he shook my hand. A man who made passive-aggressive jokes about my calloused hands and my truck. Jokes wrapped in a smile, but sharp as a razor. I should have stepped in right then. But I didn't. I respected her choice. What an absolute fool I was. A father's job isn't to respect a marriage that is actively destroying his child. A father's job is to protect her, even from her own mistakes. I let her walk straight into a den of wolves, because I didn't want to look like an overprotective, controlling parent. Sitting there in that cell, I let the guilt wash over me. It felt heavier than the concrete walls. Hours crawled by. The morning sun started creeping through the high barred window. I waited to be arraigned, waited for a chance to post bail. I had more than enough cash to pay whatever they wanted 10 times over, but nobody came for me. It wasn't until almost noon that the iron door buzzed open. A guard called out my name. "Pendleton, your attorney is here." They led me into a tiny visitation room. Elena Rostova was already waiting for me. Elena was my personal lawyer and the chief counsel for the legal department of my business empire in Houston. Outside of myself, she was the only person in the world who knew the true extent of my wealth. When I walked in, she stood up, her face tight with a professional anger she was trying hard to suppress. She didn't offer a handshake. She just pointed at the chair. "Sit down, Arthur." I took a seat. "Where's the bail bondsman?" I asked. "There is no bail," Elena said, her voice incredibly tense. "The judge denied it." "Denied it? On what grounds?" "I have a clean record, and I am a senior citizen with a permanent residence." "On the grounds that Richard Kensington played a round of golf with that exact judge last Sunday," Elena said, opening her briefcase. "They are charging you with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. They're claiming the truck was the weapon. They're saying you tried to kill Eleanor." I let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Of course he did. He wants to bury me under a mountain of legal fees and jail time so I can't look for Clara." "Where is she?" I demanded. "She's at a private facility," Elena said. "Desert Orchid Retreat." It's a maximum security psychiatric facility out on the edge of the West Texas desert. Richard got an emergency medical guardianship order this morning. He claimed Clara had a severe bipolar episode and was an extreme danger to herself and others. They have her on a 72-hour involuntary hold. No visitors, no phone calls. My hands balled into tight fists on top of the metal table. They locked her away. They were drugging her, keeping her hidden to cover up the evidence. "This isn't a legal battle, Elena," I said softly. "This is an ambush." "Richard thinks he's already won," Elena said. "He thinks you're just an angry old country boy from Texas. He has no idea about your holding companies. He has no idea about your liquidity." "He's about to find out," I said, leaning in close. "Elena, do you have the red ledger with you?" Elena gave me a slow nod. She knew exactly what I was talking about. That was the setup protocol for my black box fund, a war chest I had been building since the very day Clara was born. On paper, that money couldn't be traced back to me by a soul. It was the kind of capital that could move mountains, or completely level them. "Activate it," I said. Elena hesitated for a second. "Arthur, if we pull this trigger, we're declaring total war. We're going to burn through cash at a rate that would make Wall Street bankers break out in a sweat. We're talking hostile takeovers, buying up high-risk distressed debt, all of it." "I don't care," I cut her off. "I want you to buy up everything they touch. Find out who holds the mortgage on the Kensington estate in Austin, and buy it. Find out who owns the venture bonds for Julian's piece of junk tech company, and buy them out. Buy the loan on his sports car, buy Eleanor's platinum card debt, buy Richard's country club membership tabs. Take it all." I looked Elena straight in the eyes. "They stole my daughter, and they locked me in a cage. I am going to take away their entire world. I want to own the very air they breathe. By the time I walk out of this jail, I want to be their landlord, their banker, and their worst nightmare." Elena snapped her briefcase shut, the locks clicking like the hammer of a gun. "I'll start making calls," she said. She stood up and knocked on the metal door for the guard. Before she walked out, she looked back at me one last time. "It took Richard Kensington 40 years to build his legacy. It'll take us about 40 minutes to buy it all up." I leaned back in the plastic chair. For the first time since that phone call woke me up in the middle of the night, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was the calm of a man who knows he's holding the biggest weapon in the room and just flipped the safety off. They wanted to use the system against me, and they wanted to use their power to crush a nobody rancher. They were about to find out that the exact same nobody owned the bank that built the pedestal they were standing on. "Get me out of here, Elena," I said. "I've got a daughter to save." The afternoon sun outside the precinct was so bright it felt like an insult. I walked through the heavy steel doors with my shoelaces back in my boots and my wallet in my pocket, but I didn't feel free. Elena was waiting by her black sedan. She wasn't smiling. Instead, she handed me a piece of paper. It was a temporary restraining order. While I was sitting in that cell, Richard Kensington hadn't wasted a single second. The order was ironclad. I had to stay 500 ma away from Clara, Julian, and their properties. I was banned from contacting them by phone, email, or even through a third party. If I violated it, I'd go straight back to jail. And this time, there wouldn't be a judge in Texas who would grant me bail. I crumpled the paper up in my fist. They were using the law like a shield to cover up a crime. "Where is she, Elena?" I asked. "Desert Orchid," she replied. "But Arthur, you can't just go down there. The restraining order covers her location. If you step 1 foot on that property, Richard will have you arrested before you even make it to the front desk." I climbed into my truck. The front bumper was bent and twisted, a jagged metal reminder of the night before. I cranked the engine. I didn't head toward Desert Orchid. I knew Elena was right. If I rushed over there now, I'd be playing into their hands, on a board where they wrote the rules. I needed to change the game entirely. I drove out to a rundown, nondescript office building in the industrial district. This was where I kept my other insurance policy. His name was Marcus, a former forensic accountant for the state attorney's office turned private investigator. He didn't care about the law. He cared about the facts, as long as the retainer check cleared. I walked into his office. Marcus was buried behind a mountain of paperwork. He looked up, his eyes exhausted but sharp. "Hear you had a busy night, Arthur," he said. I sat down across from him. "Tell me you found something, Marcus. Tell me why they took my daughter." Marcus slid a thick manila folder across the desk. I flipped it open. The first thing I saw was a medical intake sheet from the Desert Orchid Retreat, dated this morning. The diagnosis read, "Severe paranoid schizophrenia with acute mania." My hands started to shake. I kept reading. The report claimed Clara had a 2-year history of prescription drug abuse, that she was prone to self-harm, and that she suffered from violent hallucinations. "This is all garbage," I whispered. "Clara gets heart palpitations just from drinking coffee. Her only addiction is her botany research. She isn't crazy." "Look at the signature," Marcus said. I looked down. "Dr. Athos Thorne." I didn't recognize the name. "Thorne is the Kensington family doctor," Marcus explained. "He's a concierge physician for the ultra-wealthy. He'll sign off on absolutely anything if the price is right. But take a look at the actual toxicology screen attached behind it. That's the real data I pulled through a contact at the lab." I turned the page. The official report listed all kinds of hallucinogens, but Marcus's intercepted lab results told a completely different story. There were 0 illegal drugs in her system. Instead, her blood was loaded with massive amounts of Haldol and Ativan. I looked up at Marcus. "Heavy-duty chemical restraints and antipsychotics," he said. "They aren't treating a breakdown, Arthur. They're chemically lobotomizing her. They're keeping her heavily sedated so she can't speak. They've trapped her in a twilight state so she can't tell anyone what she found out." A cold, heavy rage settled deep in my stomach. This felt completely different from the anger I felt the night before. This wasn't fire. It was ice. They were erasing my daughter, turning her into a vegetable just to cover their tracks. "Why?" I asked. "Why go this far? Why not just get a divorce? Why destroy her life?" Marcus reached for a second folder. This one was even thicker. "Because of this." He opened it up to reveal a complete financial autopsy of Julian Kensington. On paper, Julian is a hotshot tech CEO. He wears $5,000 custom suits, drives a Porsche, and lives in a mansion. But the records in front of you show that beneath all that gold plating, everything is rotting. "Julian is broke," Marcus said flatly. "And not just broke, he's underwater. He's been cooking the books for his company to cover up a fatal flaw in their product line. The SEC is looming over him with a $15 million fine for securities fraud. His personal venture capital has been burned to ashes." I flipped through the bank statements. Red ink and overdraft fees everywhere. "But that's not even the worst of it," Marcus continued. "He drained the trust." I stopped dead. The breath caught in my throat. When my wife passed away, she left a trust fund for Clara. It was a substantial amount of money, set up so Clara would never have to worry about a thing for the rest of her life if she didn't want to. That money was supposed to be completely untouchable. It's gone, Arthur. Every single dime. Over the last 18 months, Julian forged her signature on withdrawal requests. He bled it completely dry to cover the margin calls on his failing business. A wave of nausea hit me. My wife's legacy, the safety net I built for my little girl, stolen by a man who used to smile at me across the dinner table. Even that wasn't enough, though. Marcus pointed to a document at the very bottom of the pile. It was a loan agreement, but not from any bank. It was a promissory note from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. He borrowed $5 million from a front organization used to launder money for a Mexican cartel, Marcus said. Sky-high interest, a brutal repayment window, and a zero-tolerance policy for defaults. I looked at the date. The loan was due in 2 weeks. "He doesn't have the cash," I said. "Exactly. He's got nothing," Marcus agreed. "His parents, Richard and Eleanor, they're asset-rich, but completely cash-poor. All their wealth is tied up in trusts and real estate that they can't liquidate quickly without raising major red flags." "Then why keep Clara?" I asked. "If her money is gone, why control her?" Marcus pulled out a copy of a patent certification. "Because of this. the patent Clara developed for an agricultural drone algorithm during her PhD program. I nodded. I knew about it. Clara was a genius, and that algorithm drastically cut down the time drones took to scan fields for crop diseases. A massive agtech conglomerate just greenlit an acquisition, Marcus said. That patent is worth $20 million right now. Julian knows it. He has a buyer lined up for an all-cash deal. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. He needs her to sell it. He needs her signature. Correction. He needed her signature, but Clara said no, Marcus said. I found the emails on Julian's server. He's been pressuring her to sign it over for months. She refused, telling him it was her life's work. So he needs her incapacitated, I said, putting the pieces together. Bingo. If Clara's declared mentally incompetent and committed to a long-term facility for a severe psychotic break, control of her estate automatically transfers to her spouse. Julian gets power of attorney. He signs the transfer, sells the patent, pays off the cartel, and walks away with a fortune left over. It was a slave contract. They weren't just trying to keep her quiet. They were trying to enslave her. They stripped away her sanity, her voice, and her assets just to cover up his crimes. They planned on locking her away in a drug-induced fog for the rest of her life, or at least until she accidentally overdosed. Also, Julian could keep playing his part as a wealthy big shot. I stared at the photo of my daughter in that medical file. She looked pale, lost, and completely broken. They think she's just a resource, I said. They think she's a piggy bank they can just crack open. They have no idea who they're messing with, Marcus replied. They think you're just some country bumpkin driving a pickup. I snapped the folder shut, holding on to that toxicology report. I'm not just a father, I said. I'm about to be the guy who forecloses on their entire lives. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote Marcus a check for $50,000. Keep digging, I told him. I want names. I want to know who holds Julian's black market debts. I want to know who the frontmen are. I want to know where Richard is hiding his cash. I want to know everything. I walked out of his office. The sun was going down, bleeding a deep crimson across the sky. It felt fitting. Sitting in my truck, I called Elena. Elena, I said, I know what they're after. It's Clara's patent. I'll file for an emergency injunction on that patent immediately, Elena said. I'm going to lock it down legally so tight not even a mosquito could fly through. They won't be able to sell a single line of code. Do it, I said. And Elena? I'm here, Arthur. Did you find out who owns the debt on the Kensington mansion? I did, Elena answered. It's held by a private equity firm out of Boston. Buy it, I said. Arthur, that's going to cost a fortune. I don't care what it costs. Buy the note. I want to be the one holding the deed to their house. I want to be the guy who decides if they have a roof over their heads tonight. Consider it done. I hung up. I looked at the restraining order sitting on the passenger seat. It said I couldn't go near them, couldn't touch them, but it didn't say a damn thing about buying them. They wanted to trap my daughter in a prison made of lies and drugs. Well, I was going to build a cage around them made of debt and legal destruction, and I was going to weld the doors shut myself. I cranked the engine. I wasn't going home. I had work to do. I drove toward the city, toward the lights, straight toward a war. The Kensingtons love treating people like property. Fine, I was going to show them what happens when the property starts fighting back. I was going to prove to them that you don't build a dynasty on the suffering of a Pendleton. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. Tonight, I was going to become the monster they claimed I was. But I'd be a monster with a checkbook, and that's the most dangerous kind in the world. I drove over to the Episcopal Academy with a clear objective. My daughter was locked away in a chemical haze, and my son-in-law was drowning in debt, willing to sell her soul to pay it off. That left one crucial piece on the board, my 6-year-old granddaughter, Lily. She was an innocent pawn who knew absolutely nothing about the game being played. I knew the Kensingtons, and I knew how they operated. If they couldn't completely break Clara mentally, they would use Lily as leverage. They'd hold her hostage until Clara signed whatever papers they put in front of her. I had to get Lily out. I had to get her to safety before they poisoned her mind with lies about her mother. The school was a red brick fortress covered in ivy, sitting in the exact same wealthy zip code as the Kensington estate. It was the kind of place where kindergarten tuition costs $40,000 a year. I pulled my beat-up pickup to the curb, completely ignoring the dirty looks from the soccer moms in their Range Rovers. I walked into the front office. The AC was blasting. The receptionist was a woman wearing reading glasses and a pearl necklace, and she didn't bother to smile when she looked up. "I'm here to pick up Lily Kensington," I said. "I'm her grandfather, Arthur Pendleton." She froze, her fingers hovering right over her keyboard. "One moment, Mr. Pendleton." She picked up the phone and whispered something into the receiver. Instead of looking at me, her eyes were fixed on the door behind her. A moment later, the door swung open. A man in a tweed suit stepped out. It was Headmaster Harrington. I knew him, or rather, I knew of him. He played golf with Richard Kensington every Sunday. "You're out of your league here, Mr. Pendleton," Harrington said, his voice smooth, rehearsed, and completely cold. "You need to leave the campus immediately." "I'm on the authorized pickup list," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Clara added me 3 years ago." Harrington let out a sigh, like he was dealing with a slow child. "That list was updated this morning. Furthermore, we received a temporary protective order signed by Judge Miller. It states you are to have 0 contact with Lily Kensington." He held up a piece of paper. It was a fax, and the ink still looked fresh. Richard moved fast. He had used his old connections at the courthouse to seal the gates before I could even reach my family. "This is illegal," I said. "You're cutting a child off from her family. Her mother is in the hospital." "Her father gave us strict instructions," Harrington interrupted. "As you know, Mr. Kensington is a pillar of this community. We take student safety very seriously. We cannot have volatile individuals on campus." Volatile. The word just hung there in the air. He looked down at my work boots, looked at my calloused hands, and stamped a label on a man he didn't know at all. "You're making a mistake, Harrington," I said. "The only mistake was letting you get this close to the girl," he replied. "Security is already on the way. I suggest you go back to wherever it is you came from." I looked through the glass doors leading toward the classrooms. I could see the kids lining up for dismissal. I caught a glimpse of the back of Lily's head, looking so small in her navy blue school uniform. I wanted to smash through that glass, tear the doors right off their hinges, and carry my granddaughter away. But I knew that was exactly what they wanted. They wanted this rough old Texan to cause a scene so they could feature it on the evening news. I turned around and walked out. I didn't run and I didn't yell. I walked with a heavy, deliberate pace, the stride of a man mapping out the terrain of a battlefield. I waited by my pickup. I couldn't leave just yet. It wasn't time. I had to see her. I had to make sure she was okay physically. The restraining order said 500 MA. I stood right on the edge of the public sidewalk, exactly 500 MA, away from the school entrance. I verified the distance on my phone. I wasn't going to give them a technicality to arrest me over. 10 minutes later, a silver Porsche pulled into the pickup lane. It was Julian. He climbed out of the car, wearing a suit that cost more than my first house. He looked exhausted, his eyes wild and twitching, but when he spotted me standing on the corner, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He walked up to the gate where a teacher was holding Lily's hand. He signed the clipboard and took her hand, but he didn't head back to his car. He walked right toward me. He stopped about 10 feet away, staying just inside the school property line. Lily looked up and saw me. Her eyes were wide and full of confusion. "Grandpa!" she called out, her voice clear and bright. "Shh, Lily," Julian said, tightening his grip on the little girl's hand. "Grandpa isn't allowed to talk to us. Grandpa is a bad man." Those words hit me like a physical blow. He was poisoning the well. He was twisting my granddaughter's love for me into fear. Julian stared at me. His eyes were completely dead, with no soul behind them, just desperate, greedy claws. "You look pathetic, Arthur," Julian said, "standing there in your dirty clothes. You really think a judge is going to give you custody? You live on a run-down ranch and smell like cattle. Lily needs a legacy, a future. She doesn't need to learn how to brand cows." I stared back at him, my hands balled into tight fists at my sides. The urge to cross that line, close the distance, and shatter his jaw felt like a physical ache in my bones. I could do it. I could end him in a matter of seconds. I had spent 40 years doing backbreaking, life-threatening work on drilling rigs, while he spent his 40 years holding martini glasses. But then I noticed the phone in his other hand. The camera lens was peeking right out of his pocket. He was recording. He was baiting me. He wanted me to hit him right in front of his daughter. He wanted to prove to the court that I was the savage they claimed I was. I took a deep breath. I let the anger flow through my body, and then I forced it down into that cold, dark place where I keep my business decisions. "You're right, Julian," I said. My voice was dead calm. It threw him off. I saw his smile flicker for a second. "You're absolutely right. I'm just a laborer." "Go home, Arthur," Julian sneered. "Get back to your little town. Lily's last name is Kensington. She belongs with her own kind." He turned around and dragged Lily back toward the Porsche. Lily looked back over her shoulder at me, raising a small hand to give a hesitant wave. I lifted my hand and waved back, forcing a smile to my face. "I love you, Lily," I said softly. Julian slammed the car door shut on the girl. He punched the gas and peeled away from the curb, the engine roaring as he left me standing there in a cloud of exhaust. I stood there for a long time. The sun beat down on the back of my neck, and the humiliation burned against my skin. They thought they won. They thought because they held the keys to the gates, they held all the power. They thought money was the only language that mattered. Fine. If they wanted to speak the language of money, I was about to show them what a native speaker sounded like. I got into my truck, but I didn't turn the key. I pulled out my encrypted phone. This wasn't the device I used to call Clara. This was the phone I used to contact the heavy hitters who managed my hidden wealth. I dialed a direct line to a private office in Chicago. It was the personal line for William, the CEO of Lincoln Capital. I wasn't just a client to them, I was the majority shareholder. During the 2008 crash, when everyone else was insolvent, my liquidity saved that institution. They answered to me. "Arthur," William answered on the very first ring, "it's rare to hear from you during trading hours. Is everything all right?" "No, William," I said. "I want you to open up the books on the Kensington Group." The line went quiet for a second, and then I heard the rapid clack of a computer keyboard. "Richard Kensington?" William asked. "Arthur, that portfolio is pure poison. We've been advising against buying their debt for years. They are insanely leveraged. Because of the new Texas property tax laws, their real estate holdings are completely underwater. They're surviving on nothing but credit lines and their family name." "I know," I said, "and I want you to buy it." "Buy what?" William asked. "All of it," I told him. "Every single commercial loan, every personal line of credit. I want you to buy up the mortgage on their Austin estate. I want you to buy that auto loan on Julian's Porsche. I want you to buy the debt on Richard's vacation home in Aspen. If they owe a single dime to anyone in this country, I want to be the guy collecting it." "Arthur," William's voice dropped to a tense whisper, "we're talking tens of millions of dollars in bad debt. You're going to take a massive loss. This isn't a sound investment." "It's not an investment, William," I said, looking out at the empty spot where Julian's car had been parked moments ago. "It's an eviction notice. I am launching a hostile takeover on their entire existence," I continued. "I want to own the roof over their heads, the cars they drive, and the shirts on their backs. Recall all the notes, William, right now." "But, sir, the default clauses—" "Trigger them," I ordered. "They have late payments." "I know they do. Use the acceleration clauses. Demand full payment within 24 hours. William was silent for a brief moment. Then his voice shifted back into that professional, cold, and highly efficient tone. "Consider it done. We'll acquire the debt packages before the closing bell today. The demand notices will be hand-delivered to the Kensington estate first thing tomorrow morning." "Perfect," I said. "And William?" "Yes, Arthur?" "Cut off any chance of them getting new credit. Flag them as high risk. I want their credit cards declined when they walk into a grocery store. I want them to know exactly what it feels like to have absolutely nothing." "Understood." I hung up the phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The anger was gone, replaced by the cold mechanical hum of a plan in motion. Julian told me to go back to my little town, completely oblivious to the fact that my little town just bought his entire world. He didn't realize that the dirt under my fingernails was worth more than his family's entire bloodline. I started the pickup, the engine giving a low, angry rumble. "Enjoy your night in that mansion, Julian," I said to the empty cab. "It's the last one you're ever going to get." I threw it in gear. I wasn't heading home to lick my wounds. I was going to get ready. Tomorrow the debt collector was coming, and I was going to be standing at the very front of the line. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons in Austin was packed with black ties and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume and hidden desperation. The Kensingtons were hosting their annual charity gala, themed around the Family Recovery Foundation. It was an absolute masterclass in hypocrisy. On the surface, they were raising money for addiction treatment centers. In reality, they were just laundering their reputation. They needed to show the world they were still the city's premier family, even as a massive wall of debt was closing in on them. I stood near the entrance, hidden in the shadows of the velvet drapes. I wasn't wearing my work boots tonight. I was wearing a dark tuxedo, custom tailored by hand on Savile Row, an outfit that cost more than Julian's first car. I adjusted the onyx cufflinks at my wrists, feeling their cold, heavy weight. I watched Eleanor Kensington walk up to the stage. The spotlight hit her, catching the diamonds at her throat and a perfectly timed, glistening tear on her cheek. She was an incredible actress. "Our family has known pain," she told the hushed crowd, her voice trembling just enough to sound completely genuine. "We have seen how prescription drugs can destroy the brightest of minds. We are doing everything we can to save the person we love, even when they've given up on themselves." A sympathetic murmur rippled through the crowd. They were talking about Clara. They were using my daughter, the woman they had drugged and locked away, as a prop to milk donations out of the city's elite. They painted her as a tragic addict, and themselves as the long-suffering, saintly in-laws. It was nauseating. Richard stood right beside her, nodding solemnly. Julian sat in the front row, looking the part of the grieving husband. They had spun this entire lie just to cover up their bankruptcy. They needed these donations not for charity, but to pay the interest on their loans. They needed social capital to keep their creditors at bay for just one more month. I checked my watch. My banker, William, had already confirmed the wire transfers. The trap was set. I stepped out of the shadows. I didn't sneak in. I walked down the center aisle with the stride of a man who owned the building. Heads started to turn, and the whispering began immediately. "Who is that? Is that the rancher guy? What is he doing here?" I saw Richard's eyes lock onto me. His face went entirely gray. He took a step forward, looking like he wanted to call security, but he stopped himself. He couldn't cause a scene here. Not in front of the mayor and the state senators. He had to keep playing his part. I sat down at an empty table reserved for platinum-level donors, right in the front row. I picked up the bidding paddle, number 001. I had bought the table anonymously for $50,000 that morning. Eleanor faltered for a second in her speech. She stared down at me, her mouth slightly open. I poured myself a glass of water, raised it toward her, and gave her a silent toast. "Keep going, Eleanor. Tell us more about your charity." She swallowed hard and rushed through the end of her remarks. The applause was polite but confused. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. They knew I didn't belong, but my tuxedo and my seating arrangement said I had the right to be there. They were completely paralyzed by social etiquette. Next up was the main event, the auction. They trotted out a few items: a vacation in Tuscany, a vintage wine collection. I sat perfectly still. I wasn't interested in toys. I was waiting for the centerpiece. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer project booming across the room, "tonight we have a very special lot. Mrs. Eleanor Kensington has generously donated a family heirloom to support our cause, the Kensington Emerald." A model stepped onto the stage, wearing a necklace that shimmered under the lights. It featured a massive emerald surrounded by diamonds. I recognized that necklace. Clara had mentioned it to me before. It was the only real asset they had left that wasn't leveraged to the hilt. Eleanor wasn't donating it out of the goodness of her heart. She was publicly liquidating it for quick cash, disguised as a charitable act, so she could funnel the money back into her own pocket through administrative fees. It was smart, it was highly illegal, and it was about to be mine. "We'll start the bidding at $50,000, the auctioneer said. "50!" a voice called out from the back. "75!" someone else shouted. The bidding climbed slowly. The economy was tough, and even the wealthy were feeling the squeeze. Or maybe they could just sense the smell of desperation in the room. 100,000! Julian shouted. He was bidding against himself, trying to drive the price up to protect his inheritance. It was a dangerous game. If he won, they'd have to pay the auction house commission, and they'd still just have a necklace and no cash. 110, a real estate mogul followed up. I raised my paddle. 200,000. The room went dead silent. The auctioneer blinked, looking at me, then over at Richard. Richard looked like he was about to have a stroke. He couldn't stop me. Money was money. 200,000 to the gentleman in the front, the auctioneer stammered. Do I hear 220? Julian glared at me, his hand shooting up. 250? He was bluffing. He didn't have 250 grand to his name. He was praying someone else would jump in. 300,000, I said, keeping my voice level, staring right into Julian's eyes. Julian froze. He couldn't go any higher. If the gavel fell on him, his check would bounce, and the whole fraud would be exposed. He dropped his hand. Going once, the auctioneer said. 350,000! Richard yelled from the side of the stage. He was desperate. He couldn't let me have it. I didn't even look at him. 400,000. Richard's face turned a deep shade of purple. He opened his mouth, but Eleanor grabbed his arm. She whispered something in his ear, probably telling him they needed the 400 grand more than they needed their pride. Probably telling him that money could pay off the most dangerous of their loan sharks. Going twice, the auctioneer said, scanning the room for a savior who didn't exist. Sold to Mr. Pendleton for $400,000. The gavel came down, sounding exactly like a verdict. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I walked up the steps to the stage. The applause was thin and hesitant. The city's elite watched with a morbid curiosity as an old cowboy walked up to the wealthy matriarch. The auctioneer handed me the microphone, looking incredibly nervous. He passed me the velvet box containing the necklace. I took it, looking at the emerald, feeling its cold, heavy weight. Thank you, I said, my voice amplified, filling the entire ballroom. It's an honor to contribute to such a creative cause. I looked at Eleanor. She stood rigid, a forced smile plastered on her face, waiting for me to leave. She thought I was going to take my prize and disappear. But I wasn't done yet. I turned back to the audience. You know, I said, my family always taught me that real value doesn't lie in a stone. It lies in character. It lies in how you treat people when you think nobody is watching. I scanned the room, looking for a very specific target. Earlier that night, while I was still standing in the shadows, I saw a young waitress drop a tray of champagne glasses near the kitchen doors. Eleanor had absolutely screamed at her, calling her clumsy, stupid, and worthless. She fired her on the spot and told her to clean up the mess before she left. I spotted the young Hispanic girl now. She was still on her knees in the back corner of the room, picking up pieces of broken glass with tears streaming down her face. She looked about Clara's age. Excuse me, I said, pointing toward the back of the room. You, the young lady on the floor. Please come up here. Every single head turned. The girl looked up, terrified, freezing in place. Yes, you, I said gently. Please step up to the stage. She hesitated, but her manager gave her a little nudge. She stood up, brushing the glass dust off her black uniform apron. Keeping her head down, she walked down the aisle, completely terrified that she was in massive trouble. By the time she reached the stage, she was shaking all over. What's your name? I asked. Sophia, sir, she whispered. Sophia. I raised my voice, making sure it carried all the way to the back rows. Earlier tonight, I watched how Mrs. Kensington spoke to you. I heard what she said. She told you that you were worthless. She told you that you were nothing. Eleanor let out a sharp gasp. How dare you? She hissed, taking a step toward me. I ignored her completely and looked right at Sophia. She's wrong, Sophia. The work you do to take care of your family has more value than anyone sitting in this room. You have dignity. You have backbone. I opened the velvet box and pulled out the emerald necklace. I paid $400,000 for this necklace, I said. It's the pride and joy of the Kensington family. They think it makes them royalty. I turned to Sophia. I want you to have it. A collective gasp ripped through the entire crowd, and someone even dropped their glass, shattering it on the floor. Sir, Sophia stammered, I can't. You can, I said. I fastened the heavy clasp around her neck, the diamonds shimmering beautifully against her plain black uniform. It's yours, I told her. Sell it, pay for school, buy a house, start a business. Do whatever you want with it. But don't you ever let anyone tell you that you are beneath them. I turned back to Eleanor. Her face was a picture of pure, absolute horror. She was forced to watch her family legacy, her financial lifeline, hanging around the neck of the maid she had just fired. You were willing to sell your family heirloom to save your own skin, Eleanor, I said, stepping away from the microphone, but keeping my voice loud enough for her to hear. Now you can watch it walk right out the door. I looked back at Sophia. Go, I said. Run, don't look back. Sophia looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes again, but this time they were different. Thank you, she mouthed. Then she turned around, ran down the steps, and bolted for the exit, clutching the necklace tight as she ran toward a brand new life. I dropped the microphone, and it hit the stage floor with a deafening, hollow thud. I walked right past Richard, who was clutching his chest. I walked past Julian, who was staring blankly at the floor, completely shattered. I walked past the dead silent crowd and headed straight down the aisle. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody said a single word. They parted like the Red Sea to let me through. I stepped out into the cool night air. I had just spent $400,000 to make a point. It was a hell of a lot of money, sure. But seeing the look on Eleanor Kensington's face when she realized she had just been beaten by a maid was absolutely priceless. Besides, I still had the receipt. The gala was over, but the night was just getting started. I climbed back into my pickup. Now, I muttered to myself, let's go get my daughter. The gala had been a victory, but it felt hollow. I had humiliated Eleanor, but I still hadn't rescued my daughter. By the time I got back into my truck, the adrenaline from the auction had faded, leaving a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. Marcus sent the coordinates to my encrypted phone. The Desert Orchid Retreat wasn't a hospital at all. It was an isolated fortress built deep in the middle of nowhere, miles away from cell towers and prying eyes. I drove through the pitch-black night. The asphalt gave way to gravel, winding upward into dense pine woods. The facility materialized out of the darkness like a ghost. It was a brutalist structure of concrete and glass, surrounded by a 12-foot fence, topped with razor wire. They called it a wellness retreat for wealthy families. Looking at the perimeter lights and the guard shack, I knew exactly what it really was. It was a prison for fixing problems, a place where the elite hid wives who knew too much and kids who embarrassed them. I parked my truck in a logging clearing about a mile away. Sitting in the dark, I scoped out the facilities through a pair of binoculars. I saw armed patrols, and I saw electronic keypads on the doors. If I tried to ram through these gates, I'd be shot to pieces before I even made it to the front entrance. Richard Kensington had learned his lesson, and he had moved Clara to a place specifically designed to keep guys like me out. But I used to be a builder. When I look at a building, I don't see a fortress. I see blueprints, permits, and building codes. And I knew for a fact that a facility thrown up this fast in a remote area like this had to have cut corners. You don't build a structure like that in this county without paying someone off, and you don't run a medical facility without strict inspections. I also knew that money usually makes inspectors look the other way. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my lawyer. I called Carter, a regional director at the EPA. 40 years ago, we had worked side by side on the Texas oil fields, and I had saved his life. He was an honest man and an incredibly stubborn bureaucrat. Carter, I said when he picked up. I know where she is, and I know how we get her out. But I need you to bring someone with you. I need you to bring a state inspector from the Water and Land Management Board. Carter brought a man named Vance. Vance was a completely humorless guy with a borderline obsessive fixation on environmental regulations. He was the most boring man I had ever met, but right now he was my most lethal weapon. We met up at dawn at the end of a dirt trail. Carter looked grim, and Vance was clutching a clipboard, visibly annoyed about being woken up so early. This place has been operating illegally under a temporary permit for 3 years, I told Vance, pointing toward the facility. They claim it's a nature retreat to bypass commercial zoning laws. They have 20 patients locked in rooms with magnetic locks. But I'd bet my life their underground septic system is illegally draining straight into the protected tribal watershed, because the main sewage line doesn't even run up this mountain. Vance's eyes lit up. To him, a violation of environmental code was a personal insult. If that's true, Vance said, I have the authority to shut them down immediately. I can issue an emergency evacuation order. Then let's go find out, I said. We drove up to the gates in a federal government vehicle. A guard stepped out, his hand resting on his holster. But when he saw the federal emblem on the car door, he hesitated. Open the gate, Carter ordered over the loudspeaker. Official government business. The guard tried to stall. I need to call the director first. You open this gate right now, or I will arrest you on the spot for obstructing a federal investigation, Carter roared. The gate slowly clicked open. We parked right at the front entrance. The director met us at the door. He was a smooth-talking man in a white lab coat named Dr. Thorne, the exact same guy who had signed the fake intake form. Gentlemen, he said with a greasy smile, what brings you out here? We have very strict privacy protocols. I stepped out from behind Carter. Thorne's smile vanished instantly. This isn't a social visit, I said. This is a surprise enforcement raid. Vance stepped forward. He didn't smile, and he didn't offer a handshake. He walked right past Thorne, pointing out at a drainage pipe in the courtyard. Where are your waste management logs? Vance demanded. Where is the compliance certification for your underground storage tanks? Thorne began to stammer. We are fully compliant. We have an exemption. There are no exemptions when it comes to federal water safety, Vance said, walking over to a control valve on the side of the building, noticing right away that it had been illegally modified. This facility is an ecological time bomb. I'm pulling your operating license effective immediately. You have 1 hour to evacuate all patients to a certified hospital. Thorne went entirely pale. You can't do this. Mr. Kensington isn't a federal judge. Carter cut him off. You heard the man. Start the evacuation now. I didn't stick around to watch them argue. While Thorne was completely overwhelmed by the bureaucratic nightmare of his own negligence, I slipped past the reception desk and swiped a keycard from the counter. Marcus had already dug up the blueprints. The high-security wing was down in the basement. I ran down the concrete stairs. The air got noticeably colder, and a sharp smell of bleach filled the hallway, failing to mask the underlying scent of urine and fear. I walked down the corridor, checking the small windows on the heavy steel doors. Room 101, empty. Room 102, an old man rocking back and forth. Room 103. I looked inside, and my heart dropped. Clara was in there. They had her strapped down to a bed right in the middle of the room, her wrists locked in heavy leather restraints. An IV line was running straight into her arm. Her eyes were wide open, but they were completely lifeless, staring blankly up at the ceiling like she couldn't see a thing. She looked exactly like a broken rag doll. I swiped the keycard against the scanner. A red light flashed. Access denied. I didn't care. I took a step back and slammed my boot into the lock mechanism as hard as I could. Sparks flew everywhere, but the door didn't budge. I kicked it again, channeling every ounce of raw fury I had left into my leg. The plastic housing shattered. I jammed my pocketknife into the exposed wires and gave it a hard twist. The door clicked and slid right open. "Clara?" I whispered, rushing over to her side. She didn't respond, didn't even blink. I ripped the IV line right out of her arm. I wasn't worried about being gentle. I just wanted that poison out of her veins. I fumbled with the thick leather straps on her wrists. They were on so tight they had dug deep into her skin, and her arms were covered in dark purple bruises. "What did they do to you?" I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. I unbuckled one strap, then the other, and pulled her up into a sitting position. She went completely limp against me, her head resting heavily on my shoulder. She was drooling a little bit. "Dad," she mumbled, her voice thick and slurred, like her tongue was swollen inside her mouth. "Dad, is that you?" "I'm right here, baby," I said, wrapping my arms around her. "I've got you." "You have to leave," she whispered. "They're gonna hurt you." "Nobody is ever gonna hurt us again," I promised her. I lifted her up and carried her out into the hallway. 2 orderlies appeared at the end of the corridor. They were big guys, clearly used to getting rough with sedated patients. "Hey!" one of them yelled. "Put her down!" I kept walking right toward them. Even with my daughter in my arms, I felt light as a feather. I felt unstoppable. "Get out of my way," I warned them. They hesitated. They saw the look in my eyes. They saw a father who had already smashed a gate and bought a bank. They did the math and decided their hourly wage wasn't worth dying for today. They stepped aside. I carried Clara up the stairs and burst into the lobby. Vance was busy writing out citations, and Carter was putting handcuffs on Thorne. "I got her," I announced. Carter took one look at the state Clara was in, and his jaw clenched tight. "Get her to the truck, Arthur," Carter said. "I'll handle this trash." I stepped out into the sunlight. I placed Clara in the passenger seat of my pickup, buckled her in, and wrapped my jacket around her shaking shoulders. As we peeled away from that house of horrors, Clara started to cry. It was a deeply painful, low wail. "They made me sign it," she sobbed. "They held my hand and forced me to sign those papers. They took the patent." "We're going to get it back," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "No," she said softly, her voice suddenly snapping into sharp, terrifying clarity. "It's worse than that. Dad, you have to listen to me." "I'm listening, baby. That factory explosion last year," she said. "It wasn't an accident. It was Julian. To rush the drone prototype out, he completely bypassed the safety tests on the batteries. He was testing it with people's lives." I slammed on the brakes, pulling the truck hard onto the gravel shoulder of the road. Dust swirled outside the windows. "Say that again," I ordered. "People died, Dad. That young engineer didn't make an operational mistake. Julian's decision killed him. He called his father, and Richard used his political connections. They paid off the state inspectors and falsified the accident report." Clara sobbed, covering her face. "I found the real data logs. They threatened me, telling me that if I ever told a soul, they would destroy me." Dead silence filled the cab of the truck. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a sledgehammer. This wasn't just about money anymore, and it wasn't just about a $20 million patent. This was a cover-up for a fatal case of corporate manslaughter and corruption. They locked my daughter up, drugged her, and tried to make her look insane, not just to steal her property, but to keep her from sending Julian to federal prison. I looked at my daughter. She was terrified, broken, and traumatized. But she was alive, and she had just handed me the launch codes. "We aren't going to the police," I said, cranking the truck back into drive. "Richard has too many eyes and ears at the local precinct. If we walk in there right now, we're never coming back out." "Then where are we going?" she asked, panicked. "We're going to verify this story," I told her, "and then we are going to bury them." I drove out to Houston to a low-profile hotel I owned through one of my holding companies. Avoiding the main lobby entirely, I brought her up to the penthouse suite using the service elevator. I called in a private doctor I trusted explicitly, a man who owed me a massive life favor, to give her a full evaluation and flush the sedatives out of her system. Then I called Marcus and told him to start digging into the files from that factory explosion immediately. "Stay right here," I told Clara. "Don't open the door for anyone, and don't touch the phone. I'll be back." "Where are you going?" she asked. "I'm heading back to the ranch," I said. "I need to grab that data, and I need to draw their fire away from you." I drove out to my ranch on the outskirts of town. It was a simple 2-story wooden home, surrounded by quiet pastures. I had lived there for 30 years. It was the only home Clara really knew before she married into the Kensington nightmare. But as I turned down my dirt road, I ran right into a total circus. News vans were parked all over my lawn, satellite dishes aimed directly at my front door. Reporters were swarming the driveway like vultures, and right in the middle of it all, standing at a makeshift podium, was Richard Kensington. He was wearing a somber suit that looked perfect for a funeral, looking absolutely devastated. He was speaking into a cluster of microphones, his voice dripping with fake emotion. "We are begging Mr. Pendleton," Richard said, pretending to wipe a tear from the corner of his eye. "Arthur, we know you're angry. We know you have a history of volatility. But Clara needs medical attention. She is sick. She is a danger to herself. Please, just bring her home. We won't press charges. We just want our daughter back." It was an incredible performance. He was painting a masterpiece out of pure lies. He had flipped the entire narrative upside down. I wasn't the rescuer anymore. I was a deranged, violent father who had kidnapped his drug-addict daughter from a treatment facility. He was playing on every stereotype in the book: the unhinged country boy, the benevolent white-collar politician, and the tragic daughter caught in the middle. I parked my truck by the gate and walked right into the crowd. A reporter spotted me. "There he is!" someone shouted. The cameras spun around, the flashes blinding me for a second. Microphones were shoved right into my face. "Mr. Pendleton, is it true you assaulted medical staff at Desert Orchid?" "Mr. Pendleton, do you have a history of domestic abuse?" "Is your daughter abusing illegal substances, Mr. Pendleton?" They didn't even give me a chance to speak. The questions they shouted were basically accusations. Richard looked at me from across the sea of cameras. He didn't look scared at all. He looked smug. His eyes were telling me, "You can't win this. I own the media." I pushed through the crowd without saying a single word. I didn't hit anyone, though God knows how badly I wanted to. I walked up to my porch, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside, shutting the noise out behind me. My house was quiet, smelling of lemon wax and old paper. I walked over to the living room window and peered through the blinds. Richard was wrapping up his press conference, looking every bit the statesman. The reporters were eating it up, broadcasting his lies across the state in real time. My phone rang. It was Elena. "Arthur, turn on the TV," Elena said. "Channel 4. I clicked it on. The banner screaming across the bottom of the screen read, "Deranged grandfather kidnaps daughter. Attacks facility staff. Statewide manhunt underway." "They issued a warrant," Elena said. "Aggravated assault with intent to commit a felony. Kidnapping. A judge signed off on it 10 minutes ago. They're coming for you, Arthur. You need to get out of there." "No," I said. "If I run, I look guilty. If I run, they win." "They are going to arrest you," Elena warned me. "And they aren't going to be nice about it this time." Richard used his state-level connections. "These aren't local deputies, Arthur. They're SWAT. It's an enforcement team." "Let them come," I said, and hung up the phone. I walked into the kitchen and brewed a pot of tea. I sat down in my favorite armchair in the living room, and I waited. 20 minutes later, the siren started. It wasn't just one or two cars, it was a dozen of them. They came screaming down my ranch road, drowning out the voices of the reporters outside. I heard tires tearing up the grass and car doors slamming open. Then came the megaphone. "Arthur Pendleton, this is the state police. Come out with your hands up." I took a sip of my tea and didn't move. A few seconds later, my front door exploded inward. They didn't even try the handle. A battering ram smashed my oak door into splinters. Men in full tactical gear swarmed into my living room, carrying assault rifles and ballistic shields. They looked like they were invading a hostile country, not arresting a 65-year-old retired senior. "Get on the ground right now." I set my teacup down on the coaster. I slowly got down onto my knees and placed my hands behind my head. They tackled me instantly. A heavy boot slammed into my back, knocking the wind right out of my lungs. A knee pinned my face hard into the carpet. They pulled my wrists back and yanked zip ties so tight around them that my fingers immediately went numb. "Clear!" one of them shouted. "No sign of the girl," another yelled. They hauled me up and threw me onto the couch. A man in a plain suit walked in, wearing a trench coat and a smug sneer. I recognized him immediately. Detective Harris. He was notorious around the county, famous for finding evidence that didn't exist before to close high-profile cases. He was Richard's personal cleaner with a badge. "Where is she, Pendleton?" Harris asked, leaning down right into my face. I just stared back at him, completely silent. "Suit yourself," Harris said. "Boys, tear this place apart. Look for drugs, look for weapons, look for anything that can tell us where he took her." They absolutely destroyed my home. They ripped open the couch cushions, tore books off the shelves, and smashed my wife's collection of antique vases. It wasn't a search, it was a punishment. Harris just stood by the fireplace, watching. He caught the eye of a uniformed cop near the kitchen, giving him a barely noticeable nod. The young cop looked nervous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clear plastic bag stuffed with white powder. He walked over to the armchair I'd been sitting in, knelt down, and pretended to feel under the cushion. When he pulled his hand back, the bag was in plain sight. "Sir!" the cop called out. "I found something." Harris strolled over. He picked up the bag with his gloved hands and held it up to the light. "Well, well, well," Harris said, looking at me with this fake expression of disappointment. "High-grade fentanyl, and a lot of it. Looks like we didn't just find the source of your daughter's addiction, Arthur. Looks like you aren't just a kidnapper. You're a drug dealer." My heart rate should have spiked. I should have screamed that it was a setup. I should have begged them to believe me. But I just sat there, as calm as a frozen lake. I watched Harris put the evidence into a bag, and I watched them high-five with their eyes. They thought they had me nailed. They thought they found the silver bullet that would put me away for 20 years, leaving Richard free to take Clara's patent and full custody of Lily. Harris walked up to me, leaning down right against my ear. "You messed with the wrong family, old man," he whispered. "You're gonna die in prison." I looked him dead in the eye without blinking. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you should look up at the ceiling." Harris frowned. "What?" I tilted my chin up. In the corner of the room, hidden inside the smoke detector, a tiny red light was blinking. It was one of 12 4K hidden cameras I had installed 5 years ago after a break-in down the street. It caught everything. It caught the raid, it caught the destruction, and in perfect Ultra HD quality, it caught that cop pulling a bag of drugs out of his own pocket and stuffing it under my cushion. In the background, I heard a tiny muffled sob. "Daddy, I want to go home." "Shut up!" Julian barked, turning away from the receiver. "Don't you touch her, Julian," I said, dropping my voice an octave. "If you hurt a single hair on her head, there won't be a corner on this earth where you can hide from me. 20 million, 2 hours, or I start sending her back to you piece by piece." The line went completely dead. Richard followed me out into the driveway. He suddenly looked incredibly old, his arrogance completely stripped away now that his son's madness had become reality. "Call the police!" Richard demanded, his hands shaking violently. "Call the FBI. We need negotiators." "No," I said. "You bought the police chief, and you used to have dinner with the regional director of the FBI. If I call them, they'll turn this into a standoff. They'll send snipers, and they'll surround him. Julian is paranoid and delusional right now. If he sees flashing police lights, he will kill Lily, and he won't hesitate for a second." "Then what are we supposed to do?" Richard asked, a note of genuine terror in his voice for the very first time. "We can't just let him run." "I'll handle it," I said, "my way." I left the broken patriarch standing there and climbed into my truck. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat in the dark, breathing in the scent of old leather and dust. I needed a plan that didn't involve sirens. I needed an army that didn't wear badges. I picked up my encrypted phone again. I didn't call my banker, and I didn't call my lawyer. I called Big Mike. Big Mike was the president of the Tri-State Teamsters Union. I had worked on the docks with him 40 years ago, when corporate raiders tried to plunder their pension fund back in the 90s. I used my own capital to save it. He didn't owe me a thing, but he would do absolutely anything for me. "Arthur!" Mike's voice boomed like a diesel engine. "It's late." "I need eyes, Mike," I said. "I need every single pair of eyes you've got on the road. What are we looking for? A silver sedan, late model, license plate Bravo Lima 69. Driver is a desperate man, and he's got a 6-year-old girl in the car. Mike didn't ask why. He didn't ask for a police report. He knew that if I was calling him at an hour like this, it was a matter of life and death. I got you covered, brother. Within 10 minutes, the call went out. Not over police scanners, but over CB radios and on encrypted dispatch channels for every trucking company, every construction crew, and every sanitation fleet in the area. I helped build this city, not just the physical structures, but the networks of people. I had hired the guys who poured the concrete, and I had paid for the weddings of the women who drove the city buses. When strikes turned violent, I'd stood on the picket lines right next to them. They didn't know the wealthy recluse Arthur Pendleton. They just knew the guy who never wrote a bad check, kept his word, and treated them like brothers. The city was starting to wake up. Headlights flickered on at truck stops all along the interstate. Delivery vans changed their routes, sweeping through the side roads. Garbage trucks slowed down to scan alleys and dead-end streets. Construction workers on the night shift climbed up into their cranes, staring out at the horizon. There were 20,000 pairs of eyes out there looking for my granddaughter. Julian thought he was running away into the dark. He thought the roads were just asphalt and concrete. He didn't realize he was driving straight into a massive net woven out of loyalty, sweat, and blood. And I was the guy sitting right in the center, pulling the strings tight. I drove toward downtown, leaving my phone on the dashboard. I watched the status reports roll in on the encrypted app Mike used for union business. Nothing on Route 9. Interstate was clear. Downtown was empty. Then, right around 4 in the morning, the radio crackled to life. "I got eyes on him," a deep, gravelly voice said. "Cement mixer 42. He just passed me on the access road near the old industrial park. He's driving incredibly erratic, heading straight toward the abandoned data center by the river. I knew that industrial park like the back of my hand. Back in the 80s, I poured the heavy foundations for half the factories out there. It was a complete maze of rusted steel and broken concrete, the perfect place for a rat to hide. "Do not engage," I ordered into the mic. "Just tail him. If you can, block off the exits, but don't let him see you." "Copy that. Mixer 42 out." I gunned the engine, and the pickup let out a deafening roar. "I'm coming, Lily," I whispered. I hung up the radio. I wasn't a grandfather anymore, and I wasn't a businessman. I was a force of nature, and I was bringing the storm right to his doorstep. I drove fast, but I kept it completely under control. I knew the layout of that industrial park. There was only one way in and one way out, unless you knew the service alleys. Julian had cornered himself. He would head for the largest building, that abandoned data center, thinking he could hold out inside. As I drove, I thought about what Julian had become. He was a product of a system that told him he could buy his way out of anything. He thought money was power, and he thought influence was strength. He didn't understand that real power belongs to the people who build your world, the ones who lay your roads and fix your pipes. He spent his whole life looking down on them, and now they were the ones hunting him down. When I neared the industrial district, I cut my headlights. I saw the silhouette of the cement mixer blocking the north road. The driver flashed his lights once. I nodded back. I parked my truck in the shadows of a dilapidated warehouse and checked my revolver one last time. 6 rounds, no safety. I stepped out of the cab. The air smelled like rust and river water. It was quiet, way too quiet. And then I heard it, a child crying. It was faint, echoing off the metal walls of the old factory. It was Lily. I followed the sound, moving like a ghost. I spent years walking active construction sites. I knew how to move without kicking up a single speck of dust. I reached the main entrance of the data center. The doors were chained shut, but a side door was hanging half open. I slipped inside. The massive hollow space was lit by a single, flimsy work light Julian had brought with him. He was pacing back and forth on a catwalk 20 feet above the concrete floor. He was screaming into his phone, probably trying to call his father again. Lily was sitting on the floor of the catwalk, her arms wrapped around her knees, shivering. I stepped out into the light. Julian? My voice boomed through the empty, cavernous building. He spun around violently, raising his gun. He looked completely manic, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his hair matted with sweat. "Get back!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "I'll shoot her, Arthur. I swear to God, I'll do it." I stopped in my tracks. I slowly raised my hands. "It's over, Julian," I said calmly. "The police aren't coming, and your father isn't coming. It's just you and me." "Where is my money?" he demanded, the barrel of the gun waving wildly between me and Lily. "Where is my helicopter?" "There is no money," I said. "There never was." "You're broke, Julian. You've been broke for a long time." "Liar!" he screamed. "My father has millions." "Your father has leveraged every single thing he owns," I said, taking a tiny step forward. "I own his debt, I own his house, and I own the very building we're standing in right now. There's nothing left, Julian. It's all gone." He stumbled back a step, looking like he had just been punched in the gut. The reality of his failure finally pierced through his drug-induced haze. "No," he whispered. "No, my last name is Kensington." "You're a criminal," I told him. "You killed a man, you drugged your wife, and you kidnapped your daughter. That's your legacy now." He looked down at Lily, then back at me. His face completely collapsed. "Then I've got nothing left to lose," he said, raising the weapon to end it all. "No!" I shouted, taking another step forward. But he didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he let out a low, sobbing laugh. "You want her?" he said, pointing the gun at Lily. "Come get her." He grabbed Lily by the collar and dragged her toward the edge of the catwalk. The guardrail was rusted out and broken. Below them was a 20-foot drop, straight down to the concrete. I froze. "Let her go, Julian. You want me to come up?" I said. "I'll come up and take her place. You want to be a hero? Be a hero." I looked at the rusted stairs, then at my granddaughter's terrified face. "All right," I said. "I'm coming up." I started toward the stairs. My knees ached, and my heart was pounding against my ribs. But I began to climb. I climbed toward the man who had torn my family apart. I prayed I had one last fight left in me, because only one of us was walking out of this factory alive, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be him. The metal stairs groaned under my weight. With every step, I fought against gravity and 65 years of wear and tear on my joints, but I didn't slow down. My eyes stayed locked onto Julian Kensington. He was standing 20 feet up in the air, his body swaying slightly. His once expensive suit was completely ruined by sweat and filth. He was clutching the back of my granddaughter's collar, dangling her over the edge like a rag doll. Lily wasn't crying anymore. Pure terror had shocked her into silence. Her tiny hands were gripping Julian's wrist, her wide eyes staring down at me without blinking. I reached the top platform. The catwalk was narrow and rusted out, illuminated by the harsh yellow glow of the work light Julian had hung from a crossbeam. We were suspended in the darkness of the abandoned factory, and inside this steel cage, gravity was the only law that mattered. Julian pointed the gun at me, then at Lily, then back at me. His hand was shaking so violently that the barrel was a blur. "Stay back, Arthur," he screamed, his voice breaking. "Don't take another step, or I'll let go. I swear I'll drop her." I stopped 10 feet away from him. I was close enough to see how dilated Julian's pupils were, and close enough to smell the sour stench of fear and withdrawal radiating off him. He was crashing hard. The drugs were leaving his system, and reality was rushing in like a flood to fill the void. He looked at me with a look that was half hatred, half desperate begging. He wanted me to save him, and he wanted to kill me at the same time. "Let the girl go, Julian," I said, keeping my hands open and visible. "This is between you and me. Lily has nothing to do with this." "She has everything to do with this," Julian spat. "She's my insurance policy. She's the only reason you haven't shot me yet." "I don't have a gun, Julian," I lied. My revolver was tucked right into the small of my back, cold against my spine, but I couldn't pull it. With Lily that close to the edge, if I missed, or if I startled him, she would fall. I had to break him with words. I had to shatter his mind without touching him. "You think you're smart, don't you, Arthur?" Julian let out a high-pitched, reedy laugh. "You think you beat us? You think you took everything? But my father is going to fix this. He always fixes it. He's on the phone with the governor right now. He'll get the money. The helicopter will be here any minute. I looked at him with pity. Real pity. He was a grown baby, still waiting for a daddy who was never coming to save him. Julian, I said, my voice low and steady, your father isn't calling the governor. Shut up, Julian screamed. You don't know him. He's Richard Kensington. He runs this state. Your father is at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Julian, I said. He filed a flight plan 30 minutes ago. Private charter to the Cayman Islands. One-way tickets. Julian froze, the barrel of the gun dipping an inch. Liar, he whispered. He's not alone, I pressed on. Your mother is with him. They cleaned out the safe in the wall, took the emergency cash, and took the diamonds. They left the house 20 minutes after you took Lily. No, Julian shook his head. No, they wouldn't. We're a family. They are survivors, Julian, I said. They looked at the board and realized you were nothing but a net liability. They knew the murder charges from that factory explosion would stick, and they knew the fraud investigation would point right back to them. So, they cut you loose. You are the fall guy, Julian. You're the collateral they're using to buy their own freedom. I took a small step forward, the metal grating making a tiny metallic clink beneath my boot. They left you here to take the rap, I said. Right now, they're probably flying somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, sipping champagne and planning out a press release about how their troubled son completely lost his mind. Julian's face twisted in pain. All the arrogance drained right out of him, leaving nothing but a terrified boy. That's not true, he whimpered. Call them. Call my mom. I can't get through, Julian, I told him. They turned their phones off. Try it yourself. Julian looked down at his phone lying on the catwalk floor, then back at me, then at Lily. The gun was shaking in his grip again. He was completely losing his grip on the situation. He needed to know the truth. He needed to prove me wrong. Pick it up, I said. Call her. Ask her where she is. Julian slowly squatted down, dragging Lily down with him. He didn't let go of the girl's clothes for a single second. Fumbling with his gun hand, he scooped up the phone and swiped the screen. He pressed it to his ear. I watched his face. I saw the exact second that call went straight to voicemail. I watched him redial, and I watched the desperation climb. Answer, he muttered. Mom, answer the phone. It's me. Please, just answer. Nothing. Just the dead silence of the warehouse and the mechanical voice on the other end of the line. I took another step forward. 8 feet. She's not going to pick up, Julian, I said softly. She's gone. You're completely on your own. Julian dropped the phone. It slipped through the metal grating and smashed into a million pieces on the concrete floor, 20 feet below. He stared down at the spot where it disappeared. His entire world had just vanished. The illusion of the Kensington dynasty, the safety net he had relied on for 35 years, was completely gone. He looked up at me, his eyes pooling with tears. They left me, he whispered. They really left me. Yeah, I said. But I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere. Give me the girl, Julian. It's over. He looked down at Lily. For a split second, I actually thought he was going to do it. I thought he was going to hand her over and give up. I saw his muscles relax, and I watched the barrel of the gun point down toward the floor. But then the madness snapped right back. This time it wasn't the drugs. It was pure, unadulterated desperation. It was the realization that he was going to spend the rest of his life in a cage, betrayed by the very people he worshipped. His face contorted into a look of absolute, nihilistic rage. If I'm going to hell, he hissed, raising the gun once more, I'm taking the thing you love most with me. He didn't point the gun at me. He aimed it straight at Lily's head. No, I roared. Julian's finger tightened on the trigger. His eyes were wide, hollow, and deadly. He was actually going to do it. He was going to kill his own daughter just to hurt me. I didn't think, and I didn't calculate. I just moved. I lunged forward, covering the 8 feet between us in a single heartbeat. I didn't try to grab the gun. I threw myself over Lily. I shoved my body right between the weapon and my granddaughter, wrapping my arms around her and taking the brunt of it with my back. The gunshot was deafening. It sounded like a cannon going off inside a closet. The muzzle flash blinded me instantly. I felt like a sledgehammer slammed right into my left shoulder, the massive impact spinning me halfway around and knocking every bit of air out of my lungs. I crashed hard against the guardrail, keeping Lily pinned tight against my chest. "Grandpa!" Lily screamed. I fell out onto the metal grating. My shoulder felt like it was on fire, a burning, tearing pain radiating down my arm and up into my neck. I looked down, and my shirt was already soaked through with dark, crimson blood. But Lily was safe. She was crying, but she was completely untouched. I forced my head up. Julian was standing over us, the gun still smoking in his hand. He looked completely shocked, like he hadn't expected the gun to actually go off. He stared at me, then at the gun, then back at me. He raised the weapon again, lining up for a second shot. I reached for my revolver, but my left arm wouldn't move. It was a dead weight. I reached around to my back with my right hand, but I knew I was too slow. Julian was going to end it. "Goodbye, Arthur," he whispered, and then the warehouse doors exploded inward. It wasn't the police. It was the private security team Elena had hired. They didn't shout warnings and they didn't demand a surrender. They moved with military precision. 3 men in black tactical gear burst through the side doors, moving like shadows. "Drop the weapon!" one of them barked over a megaphone, a commanding, terrifying order. Julian spun around, completely distracted. That bought all the time we needed. A shot echoed from the ground floor. It wasn't a lethal round. It was a beanbag round fired from a tactical shotgun. It hit Julian square in the chest. He folded up like a lawn chair, dropping the gun and gasping for air as he flew backward, hitting the metal grating with a heavy, hollow thud. Before he could even process what happened, the security team was on him. They swarmed up the stairs, boots clanging hard against the metal. 2 men pinned Julian to the floor, running zip ties around his wrists and ankles before he could even catch his breath. The third man, a massive guy with a medic patch on his chest, knelt down right next to me. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, pressing a thick gauze pad against my shoulder, "hang in there." I looked down at Lily. She was gripping my uninjured arm, burying her face in my chest. "Is she okay?" I rasped out, a thick taste of copper filling my mouth. "She's fine, sir," the medic said, giving Lily a quick scan. "Not a scratch on her. You took the hit for her." I turned my head toward Julian. He was screaming now, thrashing against the zip ties, cursing his parents, cursing me, cursing the entire world. He looked so small. He looked pathetic. The medic applied more pressure to my wound. The pain was blinding, white-hot and sharp, but beneath all that pain I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. "It's over," I whispered to Lily, gently stroking her hair. "It's all over." A few moments later, Elena walked into the warehouse. She was wearing her trench coat over her pajamas. She took in the entire scene, the blood, the restrained gunman, the terrified child. She walked up the stairs and stood right beside me. "The ambulance is 2 minutes out, Arthur," she said, her voice shaking just a bit. "Did you get them?" I asked, grinding my teeth through the pain. "We got them," Elena confirmed. Airport security flagged Richard and Eleanor right at the boarding gate. Their passports were red-flagged, and your bank froze their assets mid-transaction. They are currently in federal custody. I closed my eyes. The fire in my shoulder was still spreading, but so was the victory. "Good," I said. As they dragged Julian down the metal stairs, he was still screaming, "I'm a Kensington! You can't do this to me!" I opened my eyes and took one last look at him. "You're nothing, Julian," I said, my voice weak, but carrying perfectly through the quiet warehouse. "You're just a man who owes a debt, and I'm the guy who came to collect." The medics lifted me onto a stretcher. Lily refused to let go of my hand, so they let her ride in the back of the ambulance with me. As they wheeled me out into the cool morning air, I looked up at the sky. The sun was coming up, painting the clouds in shades of gold and purple. I was bleeding, I was hurt, and I was absolutely exhausted. But I had my granddaughter, and the Kensington Empire was nothing but ashes in the wind. "We won, Lily," I whispered, right as the darkness at the edge of my vision started to close in. We won. While the paramedics were cutting away my blood-soaked shirt in the back of the ambulance, Elena was receiving a detailed briefing on exactly what had just gone down at JFK International Airport. It was a scene I had mapped out with the precision of a bomb technician. Richard and Eleanor Kensington had tried to flee the country. They bought 2 first-class tickets on a commercial flight to the Cayman Islands because the private charter they had lined up had been grounded by a lien I placed on it an hour prior. They stood at the check-in counter surrounded by Louis Vuitton luggage, trying desperately to look like a powerful couple on vacation rather than 2 fugitives running from the wreckage of their lives. According to the report, Richard handed his platinum card to the ticket agent with the swagger of a man who owned the airline, but he was sweating through his suit, his eyes darting all over the terminal, looking for cops, looking for creditors, looking for me. The ticket agent swiped the card. She frowned and swiped it again. I can only imagine the look on Richard's face when she looked up and said, "I'm sorry, sir, this card has been declined." Richard must have let out that high-pitched, nervous laugh of his. "Try it again," he surely ordered. "There must be a mistake. That card has a $1 million limit." But there was no mistake. My bank had frozen every single asset tied to his Social Security number. He pulled out another card. Declined. Another one. Declined. Eleanor started hissing at him, her voice rising in a panic, telling him to fix it, telling him not to embarrass her. People were starting to stare, and the line behind them was getting restless. Finally, out of pure desperation, Richard reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of $100 bills. "Here!" he shouted, slamming the cash onto the counter. $5,000 in cash. Just give us the boarding passes." That was the fatal mistake. Doing a massive cash transaction at an international terminal triggers immediate security protocols. The ticket agent flagged security. Next came the passports. Richard had paid a guy 10 grand for 2 expedited passports under fake names. They were high-quality fakes, good enough to fool a hotel clerk, but not a Homeland Security database. The agent scanned them, and a silent alarm tripped in the TSA office. Within seconds, 4 federal agents materialized out of the crowd. They didn't ask politely, and they didn't care about Richard's golf handicap or Eleanor's charity galas. They grabbed Richard by the arms and slammed him face first onto the ticket counter. Eleanor started screaming, claiming she was being assaulted, claiming she knew the governor, claiming they were making a horrible mistake. The entire terminal watched as the grand matriarch of the Kensington family was slapped into handcuffs, her face pressed against the cold linoleum floor, her dress pushed up, and her dignity stripped away completely. They were dragged away screaming, leaving their expensive luggage spinning alone on the baggage carousel. They didn't make their flight. Instead, they made the front-page news. 12 hours later, I walked into the county detention center. My left arm was pinned against my chest in a sling. The gunshot wound throbbed with a dull, heavy ache between my ribs, but the pain kept me sharp. It reminded me exactly why I was there. I had refused the heavy-duty painkillers because I needed my head clear. I needed to remember every single detail of this conversation. Elena had tried to stop me. She told me to go home and rest, said the lawyers would handle everything. But this was personal. I needed to see her. I needed to look her in the eye one last time. The guard led me into the visitation room. It was a tiny concrete box divided by a thick sheet of plexiglass. The air inside smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. I took a seat on the metal stool, my bones protesting against the hard surface. A moment later, the door on the other side of the glass swung open and Eleanor walked in. She was wearing a baggy orange jail jumpsuit. Her hair, usually sprayed into a flawless, helmet-like perfection, was completely flat and greasy. Her makeup was gone, exposing the deep lines etched by age and bitterness across her face. But her eyes hadn't changed. They were still cold, hard, and filled with a malicious arrogance that even a jail cell couldn't wipe out. She sat down, looked at my sling, and then looked at my face. She didn't look ashamed at all. She looked furious. "You look awful, Arthur," she said over the intercom, her voice sounding thin. "I hope it hurts." "It hurts a hell of a lot less than losing a child," I replied calmly. "You ought to know. You threw your own son to the wolves just to save your skin. She let out a scoff and leaned forward, her breath fogging up the glass. You think you won, don't you? You think a little bit of cash and some dirty connections mean you can destroy us? You're an idiot. This is all a misunderstanding. Richard is on the phone right now. We have friends in D.C., and we have friends in the state capitol. We'll be out on bail by tomorrow morning, and you'll be facing a malicious prosecution lawsuit that will leave you flat broke. She actually believed it. She lived in such a thick bubble of privilege that she couldn't even see the walls closing in on her. She truly thought the rules didn't apply to anyone with her last name. There is no bail, Eleanor, I said. The judge denied it. You're a flight risk. You were caught with fake passports and 10 grand in cash. You aren't going home. She let out a sharp, cackling laugh. A minor technicality. Our legal team will shred it. You don't know a damn thing about us, Arthur. Julian lost his mind, and it's a tragedy, but it has nothing to do with us. We are the victims of an unstable son. We were trying to help him, and that is exactly why we sent Clara to that retreat. We're the good guys here. You're just a lucky thug. I just stared at her, marveling at the absolute moral vacuum inside her soul. To save her own reputation, she was ready to bury her own son. She was already rewriting history while sitting inside a cage. You really don't get it yet, do you? I asked softly. You think this is about Julian? You think this is about a kidnapping? It's about whatever lie you paid the cops to frame us with, she spat. Using my good hand, I pulled a thick red folder out of my bag. Elena had compiled it last night with the help of my forensic accountants and investigators. It was heavy, hitting the metal counter with a solid thud. I flipped it open and pressed the first page against the glass. Do you recognize this, Eleanor? I asked. She squinted. It was a bank record showing a wire transfer from a developer to a shell company registered in her name 15 years ago. I have no idea what that is, she said dismissively. It's a bribe, Eleanor, I explained. $500,000, paid to your husband, Richard. Back when he was a state senator, he used his position to kill an investigation into a developer who was using substandard concrete. 2 years later, a building collapsed and 3 people died. Richard bought a yacht the very next week. She went a little pale, but she kept her chin up. You can't prove that. I turned the page. Here's another one, I said, and another. 20 straight years of bribes, Eleanor. 20 years of selling justice to the highest bidder. Richard didn't make his money through smart investments. He made it by protecting criminals and sacrificing innocent people. We have the ledgers, we have the emails, and we have the signed confessions from the bagman who delivered the cash. Her hands started to shake. She clasped them together on the counter, trying to hide it. That was Richard's business, she whispered. I didn't know anything about it. I was just a wife. I flipped to the next section, marked the foundation. But this was your business, I said. The Family Recovery Foundation. What a beautiful charity. You raised tens of millions of dollars over the last decade. But look at the expenses, Eleanor. Look at where the money actually went. I pressed a spreadsheet against the glass. 80% of the donations went to administrative fees, I read aloud. Consulting fees paid to companies owned by you. Catering contracts given to shell corporations owned by you. You were laundering money through sick people, Eleanor. You took cash meant for addicts and used it to buy jewelry and remodel your kitchen. That's wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The FBI was incredibly interested in this file. Her face turned completely gray, the arrogant mask finally shattered, revealing a terrified old woman underneath. We needed the money, she stammered. That lifestyle. It's expensive. We had to maintain appearances. You don't understand the pressure. I understand greed, I said, snapping the folder shut. And I understand that you are going to federal prison. Not for a month and not for a year. For the rest of your life. You're 60 years old, Eleanor, with the charges stacking up. Racketeering, fraud, conspiracy to commit perjury. You're going to die in a cell. No more silk sheets and no more champagne. You're going to die alone in a concrete box, wearing orange. She bolted out of her seat, the stool scraping loudly against the floor, No, she screamed, slamming both palms against the glass. You can't do this. We are the Kensingtons. We are the pillars of this community. You're termites. I stood up slowly, my shoulder aching from the movement. You ate away at everything good until the whole house fell down. I looked at her. Tears were streaming down her face now, leaving dark streaks of cheap mascara on her cheeks. She stared at the folder, then at me. She realized there was no way out. She realized her friends in D.C. wouldn't touch her with a 10-foot pole now. She was radioactive. Arthur, please, she begged, her voice cracking. Please, I'll give you whatever you want. I'll sign anything. Just don't hand that over to the prosecutor. We can make a deal. I picked up the folder. I don't want your money, Eleanor, I said. I already own it. I don't want your house. I own that too. There is no deal. This is just the bill coming due. I turned my back on her. Arthur, wait, she screamed, pounding on the glass. Wait, I'm a grandmother. Think about Lily. I stopped. I turned my head just a fraction. I am thinking about Lily, I said. That's why I'm making sure she never has to see you again. I walked out of the room. Behind me, I could hear her screaming my name, cursing and sobbing. It sounded like music to my ears. It sounded like justice. I walked down the long gray corridor, past the guards, and past the other visitors. My shoulder was killing me, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. The empire was dead, and the queen was deposed. Now all that was left was to protect what remained of my family, and build something new out of the ashes. I stepped out into the sunlight, ready for the final act. The courtroom smelled of lemon wax and stale lies. I sat in the front row, right next to my daughter. My arm was still in a sling, and the gunshot wound sent a dull ache through my ribs. The pain kept me focused. It reminded me that this wasn't a TV show. This was a street fight where motions and objections replaced fists and bricks. Julian Kensington sat at the defense table. He looked completely shrunken. The arrogance that used to roll off him like heat waves on asphalt was entirely gone, replaced by the twitchy, desperate look of an addict detoxing in a county jail. He was wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big because he had lost 20 pounds while in custody, but he still had that smirk on his face, that lingering belief that his last name was a get-out-of-jail-free card. His attorney was a man named Preston, a shark in a $3,000 pinstripe suit who made a living twisting the law to get rich kids out of trouble. Preston was pacing in front of the jury box, painting a picture of my daughter that made my fists clench. Ladies and gentlemen, Preston said, his voice as smooth as oil, we are here today to decide the fate of a 6-year-old girl. The prosecution wants you to believe that Julian Kensington is a monster. But look at the facts. Who has a documented history of emotional instability? Who was committed to a mental intervention facility just 2 weeks ago for a severe substance abuse relapse? Who has no job, no residence, and no assets? He pointed his manicured finger straight at Clara. It's Clara Pendleton, he announced. She is a woman on the verge of a total breakdown. She invented a massive factory explosion conspiracy theory just to cover up her own prescription drug abuse. She even allowed her volatile father to violently kidnap her from a medical facility. Is this really the person we want raising a child? Clara sat in the witness box. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled neatly back. She looked a little pale, but her spine was perfectly straight. She wasn't looking at Julian. She was looking directly at the jury. She didn't cry, and she didn't flinch at the insults. Pretend they're already dead, I had told her in the car. Pretend they can't hurt you anymore because they're already ghosts. Clara was treating them exactly like ghosts. Your Honor, Preston continued, turning to the judge, we propose that full custody remain with the Kensington family until the criminal trial is resolved. This mother is clearly unfit. She is delusional. She claims her husband is a murderer without a single shred of proof. It's nothing but the ramblings of a recovering addict. I looked over at Elena, who was sitting next to the prosecutor. She gave me an almost invisible nod. It was time. The prosecutor stood up. We call Clara Pendleton for cross-examination. he said. Clara stood up and walked over to the microphone. The courtroom went dead silent. Ms. Pendleton? The prosecutor asked. Mr. Preston claims that your accusations regarding the factory explosion are just drug-induced hallucinations. He claims there is no evidence. Is that true? Clara looked at Preston, then at Julian. No, she said clearly. Her voice didn't shake at all. Do you have evidence? The prosecutor asked. I do, Clara said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an encrypted hard drive. This data was left behind by the engineer who died in the blast. He noticed the anomalies in the testing data, and inside there is a memo signed by Julian Kensington himself, demanding that the safety protocols be bypassed. There are also bank records showing the money trail Richard Kensington used to pay off the state inspectors to alter the accident report. Julian's face went completely white. He bolted upright, nearly knocking his chair over. That's illegal, he shouted. Those are proprietary company files. She can't use those. Sit down, Mr. Kensington, the judge barked, slamming the gavel down with authority. Clara handed the drive to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge and the jury. And that's not all, Clara continued, pulling out an old cell phone. My father gave me this old phone 5 years ago and installed an emergency app on it. When it's triggered, it records audio in the background and uploads it directly to a cloud server my father controls. Julian froze. I pressed it the night they tried to take me away for my so-called medical intervention. Clara tapped the screen and held the phone up to the microphone. The recording that filled the courtroom was static-heavy but perfectly audible. It was Richard Kensington's cold, overbearing voice. Listen to me, you stupid woman, Richard's voice boomed. Julian has a future, and you don't. It was an accident. The man is dead, and you can't change that. You're going to sign over that patent right now, or we will take Lily away from you. We will bury you, Clara. We'll make you look so crazy that nobody will ever believe a single word you say. Do you understand me? You are a nobody, and we own this state. Next came Julian's voice, angry and desperate. Just sign it, Clara. Are you really going to ruin our entire lives over some damn low-level worker? Then came the sound of a violent struggle, things breaking and Clara screaming. Clara stopped the playback. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. It was the sound of a massive, elaborate lie shattering into a million pieces. Preston, the defense attorney, looked like he had just been backhanded across the face. He fumbled with his paperwork, trying to find a technicality, trying to find a way out, but he knew it was over. The jury wasn't looking at Clara like an addict anymore. They were looking at Julian like a murderer and an abuser. Julian put his head in his hands. He was shaking. He wasn't crying for the engineer he killed. He was crying for himself. The prosecutor let the silence hang in the air for a long time. I have no further questions, Your Honor. Clara stepped down from the stand. She walked back to her seat, passing right by Julian, who couldn't even lift his head. But we weren't done yet. The criminal case was a done deal, but the custody battle and the civil petitions were still on the table. Preston wasn't ready to give up completely. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and tried to salvage some dignity for his client. Your Honor, Preston said, his voice incredibly tight, while these recordings are deeply disturbing, they do not change the financial reality. Miss Pendleton does not own a home. She has no income, and she has been living in a hotel paid for by her father. The Kensington estate, despite its current legal troubles, is a stable environment. It is Lily's home. It's a historic property that has been in the family for generations. We believe Lily should remain in the home she knows, under court-appointed guardianship until her mother can prove she is financially independent. He was playing the poverty card. He was betting that the judge would hesitate to hand a child over to a woman with no assets to her name. I stood up. Elena tried to grab my arm, but I brushed her off. I didn't need a lawyer for this. I just needed to be a father. Your Honor, I said, my voice echoing through the quiet room, I'd like to address the matter of the Kensington estate. The judge looked at me over the top of his glasses. Mr. Pendleton, this is highly irregular. You are not a party to this specific motion. I am the man holding the deed to that property, Your Honor, I said. Preston let out a nervous, unbelievable laugh. That's impossible. The Kensington estate is worth $5 million. It's held in an irrevocable trust. It used to be held in a trust, I corrected him, walking up toward the bench. Until the trust defaulted on the mortgage 3 months ago. The bank started foreclosure proceedings last week. I pulled a thick document out of my jacket pocket. It had a blue backing sheet and was stamped with the county seal. Yesterday morning I bought that debt, I said. I paid the bank $5 million in cash, and I officially foreclosed on the property at 9 o'clock this morning. I slammed the deed down on the defense table, right in front of Julian. That house doesn't belong to the Kensington family anymore, I said. It belongs to me. Julian stared at the paper. He read the legal description. He saw my signature on the buyer's line. His eyes practically popped out of his head. You bought my house? He whispered. I didn't buy your house, Julian, I said, leaning down close to him. I bought my daughter's house. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I have already executed a quitclaim deed. I have transferred full, unencumbered ownership of the property at 142 Crestview Drive to Clara Pendleton. She isn't homeless. She owns the mansion this man is currently sleeping in. I turned to Clara. She looked completely shocked. She had no idea I was planning on doing this. It's yours, baby, I told her. Every brick, every room, every blade of grass. Clara stood up and walked over to the table. She looked down at the deed, then she looked at Julian. For years, this man had made her feel small in that house, made her feel like a guest. He made her ask for permission before she could even change the curtains, and made her feel guilty for walking on the expensive rugs. Now she owned the rug he was standing on. Clara picked up the deed and looked straight at Preston. Get them out, she said. Her voice was ice, the voice of a woman who had walked through the fires of hell and come out as pure steel. I'm sorry, what? Preston stammered. My in-laws, Clara said. Richard and Eleanor. I know they're currently in jail, but their staff is still there, their clothes are still there, and their furniture is still there. I want it all gone. She looked down at Julian. And you, she said, you're evicted. You're trespassing. But that's my home, Julian cried out, tears spilling down his face. I grew up there. Not anymore, Clara said. Now it's Lily's home, and you aren't welcome. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, since I own the residence where my daughter has lived her entire life, since I have a clean record, and since this father is facing a massive prison sentence for manslaughter and fraud, I ask for immediate, sole legal and physical custody of Lily Kensington. I also ask for a permanent restraining order banning Julian Kensington and his parents from stepping foot on my property. The judge looked at the deed, looked at the shaking defense attorney, and then looked at the completely broken man at the defense table. He brought his gavel down hard. Motion granted. Sole legal and physical custody is awarded to Clara Pendleton. The defendant is ordered to vacate the property immediately. Court is adjourned. The sound of that gavel was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. Julian collapsed into his chair, sobbing like a baby. He lost his freedom, he lost his daughter, and now he lost the only thing that gave him an identity, his name and his house. I walked over to Clara. She wasn't looking at Julian at all. She was just staring at the deed in her hands. Thank you, Dad, she whispered. I wrapped my good arm around her shoulder. Let's go home, I said. To your house. We walked out of the courtroom. Behind us, the bailiffs were moving in, ready to take Julian back to his cell. He was still shouting about how unfair it was, screaming about his rights. Nobody was listening anymore. The sun was blazing outside. It was a crisp, crystal-clear day. The war wasn't completely over yet. There were still loose ends to tie up, a fake charity foundation to dismantle, and a corrupt legacy to erase from existence. But the hardest, most brutal battle had already been won. We climbed into the cab of my truck. Where to, Dad? Clara asked. To the estate, I said, cranking the engine. I want to watch you change the locks, and then I want to help you throw Eleanor's massive portrait straight into the dumpster. Clara laughed. It was the first time in years I had seen a real, genuine smile on her face. Let's go, she said. I drove up toward the wealthy hillside enclave. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like a cold executioner or some ruthless business tyrant. I just felt like a father, and that was more than enough. 3 days after the trial ended, the real reckoning began. It didn't happen in a courthouse with a judge and a stenographer. It happened in the cold, brutal reality of the state penitentiary where Julian Kensington was being held. He thought he was safe. He thought because he was a Kensington, he'd be placed in a minimum security facility, hanging out with white-collar criminals who played tennis all day. He was dead wrong. The exact second that guilty verdict was read, his protection policy evaporated. The cartel lenders who had loaned him $5 million didn't care about legal appeals or court motions. They cared about getting paid. Since Julian couldn't pay them back with cash anymore, he had to pay with his own skin. I got the reports from my inside contact at the Department of Corrections. Julian had been in general population for less than 6 hours before they caught up with him. They cornered him in a blind spot in the showers where there weren't any security cameras. 3 guys walked up on him. They didn't even use shivs. They just used their bare fists to deliver a message from the investors Julian had scammed. They broke his ribs, shattered his nose, and fractured his orbital bone. By the time the guards found him, he was curled up in a fetal position, sobbing, calling out for his mother instead of his lawyer. They moved him to protective custody in the infirmary, but the damage was already done. Word was out. Julian wasn't a protected prince anymore. He was a target. For the next 20 years, he's going to spend every single second looking over his shoulder, terrified of the shadows, living in a constant state of absolute panic. It's a brutal fate, but it's the exact life he carved out for himself the moment he decided human lives were nothing but collateral. While Julian was learning the rules of the yard, his parents were learning how to survive in a federal holding facility. Richard and Eleanor were staring down racketeering and fraud charges that carried enough weight to put them away for life. The prosecutor put a plea deal on the table. Just one. The first person to cooperate would get a recommendation for a reduced sentence. The other one would die in prison. It took Richard less than 10 minutes to completely turn on the woman he had been married to for 40 years. Sitting in that interrogation room, his orange jumpsuit soaked in sweat, he spilled everything. He told the federal agents that the charity fraud was entirely Eleanor's idea. He claimed she was the one who forged the signatures on the checks. He swore she was the mastermind behind the money laundering, and that he was just a confused old man completely under her spell. He painted her as a regular Lady Macbeth, pulling his strings from the dark. Right next door, Eleanor was doing the exact same thing to him. She told the agents that Richard was abusive and that he had forced her to embezzle the funds to pay off his gambling debts and cover the costs of his mistresses. She handed over a set of secret ledgers she'd been keeping for years, detailing every bribe and illegal land deal he had ever made. She sold him down the river without a second thought, hoping to buy herself a few years of freedom. The Kensington dynasty didn't end with a bang. It ended with 2 terrified old people screaming accusations at each other through cinder-block walls, destroying the absolute last shred of dignity they had left. They spent their whole lives building a picture of a perfect, united family. In the end, they were just rats biting each other on a sinking ship. While they were destroying one another, I started building something new. The bank's foreclosure on the Kensington estate went through completely. The property belonged to me now, or rather, it belonged to Clara. But we didn't want to live there. That house was poisoned, filled with the ghosts of their greed and the echoes of their lies. We decided to liquidate everything. I hired an auction house to sell off every single item inside the mansion. We sold the antique furniture, the art collection, the crystal chandeliers, and the silk rugs. We sold off their luxury fleet of cars. We stripped that house down to its bare bones. It felt like a cleansing. Every object that left the property took a little bit of the darkness along with it. The auction brought in $4 million. Combined with the frozen Kensington bank accounts and the liquidation of their shell companies, we were sitting on a fund of nearly $10 million. It was blood money, cash stolen from charities, obtained through fraud and stained with the suffering of innocent people. I didn't want a single dime of it, and neither did Clara. We sat at the kitchen table at my ranch, drinking coffee and looking at the bank drafts. "What are we going to do with this money, Dad?" Clara asked. "We're giving it back," I said. "Not to them, but to the people they hurt." We established the Clara Pendleton Foundation. Its mission was simple: provide legal defense, financial assistance, and safe housing for women, children, and whistleblowers fleeing domestic violence, corporate abuse, and coercive control. We wanted to be the safety net that Clara never had. We wanted to make sure that no woman would ever have to stay with a monster just because she couldn't afford a retainer fee or a security deposit on an apartment. We bought a building downtown, an old hotel I had renovated years ago, and transformed it into a sanctuary. We hired lawyers who were absolute sharks in the courtroom, but gentle as lambs with their clients. We hired therapists, and we hired security. We built a fortress of protection for people who had nothing left. The name Kensington used to stand for greed and corruption in this town. We erased it. In its place, we built a legacy of protection and justice. Every single dollar they stole was now being used to fight guys exactly like Julian. It was the ultimate poetic justice. A week after the foundation opened, I made one final visit. I drove out to a small medical clinic on the edge of the city. It was a modest red brick building with peeling paint on the sign. This was Dr. Evans's clinic. He was the private doctor I had called the night I rescued Clara from the retreat. He was the man who came to that hotel suite at 2 in the morning, set up the IVs to flush the sedatives out of her system, and stayed awake for 3 straight days monitoring her vitals. He had refused to take any money that night. He told me he was just doing his job as a doctor. He had risked his medical license treating a patient off the books because he saw a desperate father trying to save his daughter. He was the absolute opposite of Dr. Thorne and the corrupt medical system the Kensingtons used to exploit people. I walked into his waiting room. It was packed with people who looked exhausted, weighed down by life. It was a clinic for the working poor, for people without insurance. Dr. Evans was standing at the reception desk, looking over some charts. He looked completely wiped out. "Dr. Evans," I called out. He looked up, a tired smile touching his eyes. "Mr. Pendleton, how is Clara doing?" "She's healing," I said. "She's tough." "I'm incredibly glad to hear that," he said. "What can I do for you? If you're here for a checkup..." "You've already done your part," I told him. "You saved her life. You gave us the time we needed to get her head clear so she could stand up in that courtroom. None of this would have happened without you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. "That foundation we set up," I said, "it needs a medical director. Someone who understands that medicine is about healing, not about a billing statement. Someone who isn't afraid to stand up to power." I handed him the envelope. Inside was a contract. It offered 3 times his current salary, along with a $2 million unconditional grant to upgrade his clinic and subsidize his patients. "We want to partner with you," I said. "We want to send the women and children we help straight to you. We want to make sure they get the best care possible, whether they can pay for it or not." Dr. Evans opened the envelope and looked at the contract. His hands started to shake. He looked around the waiting room at all the people he fought so hard to help every single day. Then he looked back at me, his eyes wet with tears. "Arthur," his voice broke, this changes everything." "It's just money, Doc," I said, patting his shoulder. "It only has value when you use it to do some good. You helped me when I had nothing left but prayers. Now, let me help you." He gripped my hand tightly. His grip was firm and honest. "Thank you," he whispered. I walked out of the clinic and stepped into the sunlight. The air felt cleaner. The massive weight that had been pressing down on my chest ever since that 3 a.m. phone call was finally gone. I had dismantled an empire of lies, punished the guilty, protected the innocent, and paid my debts in full. I climbed into my pickup and checked the time. It was almost 3 o'clock. Lily was about to get out of her new school, a public school where kids didn't care about a wealthy last name. I needed to get over there. I had a grandbaby to pick up. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, leaving the past in the rear-view mirror, right where it belonged. The war was over, and it was time to live. A year later, the view from the 40th floor of the Pendleton Investment Group building was absolutely breathtaking. The entire city stretched out below us, a massive grid of lights and concrete, and a good part of it was stuff I had helped to build with my own two hands. But I wasn't the one sitting in the CEO's chair anymore. Clara was. I stood by the window, watching her run the board meeting. She was wearing a perfectly tailored beige suit, and her hair was cut into a sharp, professional bob. She looked a million miles away from the broken girl I had carried out of that rehab center. She looked like a queen. Using her own patent technology, she hadn't just started a brand new ag-tech company. She had also restructured all our distressed assets along the way. Right now, she was reviewing the quarterly projections for our new affordable housing project, pointing out inefficiencies with a sharp, intense focus that made me miss her mother so much it hurt. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and carrying total authority, "we are absolutely not cutting corners on the insulation. I don't care what the budget sheet says. We build things to last. If you can't make the numbers work, find another supplier or I'll find a new board of directors." The room went dead silent. Then heads started nodding and pens started flying across paper. They respected her, not because she was my daughter, but because she was a force to be reckoned with. She had taken over day-to-day operations 6 months ago, and the company was stronger now than it had ever been. She had taken all the pain of the last few years and forged it into armor. Lily was sitting in the corner, playing with a toy dump truck on the expensive rug. She looked up at me and flashed a big grin, showing off the gap where she had just lost a baby tooth. "Look, Grandpa," she whispered, sliding the truck across the floor. "I'm hauling concrete just like you used to do." I smiled. She wasn't afraid of loud noises anymore, and she didn't flinch when adults raised their voices. She was just a happy, normal 6-year-old girl. The shadow of the Kensington estate had finally cleared out of her eyes. Clara adjourned the meeting. The executives filed out of the room, shaking her hand with genuine respect. She walked over to me and kissed my cheek. "How did I do, Dad?" she asked, the steel in her voice softening instantly. "You did incredible, baby," I said. "Better than incredible. You're running this ship way better than I ever did." She looked out at the city skyline. "I learned from the best," she said. "And Dad, thanks for handling the intake paperwork for the foundation this morning. Dr. Evans said we have 3 new families coming in for help." "Yeah," I said, "and we're going to do everything we can for every single one of them." The Clara Pendleton Foundation was thriving. It had become a beacon for women trapped in abusive marriages, providing legal aid, housing, and a real way out. Every single dollar we spent was a direct hit against men exactly like Julian. It was the best investment I had ever made. I looked at my daughter and my granddaughter. They were safe, they were strong, and they were free. The war was finally over. Later that evening, I drove back to my old ranch house on the outskirts of town. It was peaceful out there. The damage from the raid had been repaired, the walls were repainted, and the furniture was new, but the soul of the place was exactly the same. It was a place of pure quiet. I walked down to the mailbox at the end of the dirt road. The air was crisp, smelling of autumn leaves. I pulled out a stack of bills and junk mail, and then I saw it. A plain white envelope. The return address was stamped in red ink. Danbury Federal Correctional Institution. Handwritten above the address, in a shaky, trembling script, was the name Inmate 89402, Eleanor Kensington. I just stared at it. I didn't feel angry and I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel anything at all. It was like looking at a relic from a dead civilization. I walked back inside the house. I didn't open the envelope. I already knew exactly what was inside. It would be a plea, a manipulation, a sob story about how hard prison life was, how she was sick, how she needed commissary money or cash for a new lawyer. She would try to find some pity in me, try to use guilt, try to use Lily's name. But Eleanor Kensington didn't understand that she had run out of credit a long time ago. She was bankrupt on every single level that mattered. I walked over to the fireplace in the living room. The embers from last night were still glowing faintly beneath the ash. I struck a match and held it to the edge of the envelope. I watched the flame take hold, the paper curling and turning black, the red prison stamp dissolving into smoke. I held it until the heat bit into my fingertips. Then I dropped it into the grate. I watched it burn until it was nothing but gray ash. I didn't owe her a response. I didn't even owe her a thought. Her punishment wasn't just the cell. It was the silence. It was the absolute desperation of knowing the world had moved on without her. Knowing that the people she tried to destroy were thriving while she rotted away. That was real justice. I brushed the ash off my hands and went into the kitchen. It was time for coffee. I poured myself a mug of black coffee and walked out onto the back porch. I sat down in my rocking chair, the wood groaning familiarly beneath me. The sun was going down, casting long shadows across the pastures I had tended to for 30 years. I took a sip. It was hot and bitter, exactly the way I liked it. My mind drifted back over the journey, the smashed gates, the jail cells, the auction gala, the abandoned warehouse. It felt like a lifetime ago, but the physical reminders were still there. My shoulders still ached when it rained, but those were good scars. They were reminders that I stood my ground. When I go to the grocery store now, people look at me. Some of them whisper, some of them point. "That's the guy who took down the Kensingtons," they'll say. "That's the old cowboy who bought a bank." But most people just see an old Texan in a flannel shirt, sitting on his porch, drinking coffee. And that's more than enough for me. I don't need them to know the limits of my power. I don't need them to know about the accounts, the properties, or the influence. I know, Clara knows, and the Kensingtons sure as hell know. I taught them a lesson, and I hope it echoes through the hallways of their country clubs for generations. Never underestimate a father. Never assume a man is weak just because he's quiet. Never assume a man is poor just because he chooses to be humble. And most importantly, never ever touch his family. I looked over at the property next door where a young couple was moving in. They waved at me from their driveway. I waved back. I'm just Arthur. I'm a neighbor and I'm a grandfather. But if the devil ever decides to knock on my door again, if anyone ever tries to hurt the people I love, they'll find out that this old cowboy still has plenty of fight left in him. I took another sip of my coffee and watched the stars start to punch through the night sky. The world was right again. My daughter was a queen, my granddaughter got to be a kid again, and the monsters were locked up in their cages. It was a good night, and tomorrow I had a ranch to run. I learned through all of this that real power doesn't need to yell. The Kensingtons built their empire on a flashy, vain idea of wealth, but it was hollow. I built my empire on a solid foundation, on loyalty and on silence. They mistook my humility for poverty, and they mistook my patience for weakness. That was their fatal mistake. Never let anyone define your worth by your zip code or the clothes on your back. Dignity isn't something you can buy. It's something you earn through your actions. Just remember, the most dangerous man in the room is always the one who has nothing to prove to the world, but everything to protect for his family.